So cheers, Zina. Welcome to podcast.
Cheers.
Officially.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're supposed to have a sip after cheers, by the way.
yeah,
That's
you're
bad
right.
luck.
It
Oh
is
my
bad
God. That's one way to start this episode. Oh man.
Accepted. I think one of the things that me and you both have to be cognizant of is we're both naturally very loud
Yep.
and we're both fast talkers.
That's right. Yeah. Actually, one of the things that I consciously do on the podcast is try to speak slowly. And I can hear myself and this is almost like communication practice for me. But more importantly, it is a good way to hang out, to catch up with friends, to meet new people, and to give a shit about some topics that I found myself just like, I stopped caring, after this whole pandemic happened. And I don't know at which point in my adult life, I just felt myself like nothing on the news, no story triggers me enough or makes me. So I felt like this podcast would be a reason to kind of give a shit up again. And it has. It's done that, if nothing else. But speaking of the pandemic, you were over, the last time you were over at our house was actually just before the pandemic happened.
Yes.
Remember that? It was
February. We had a nice dinner. It was February 2020. Whole different world.
Whole different world. And then a few days after that, lockdown, the world went crazy. And what a period it's been for me for sure, but friends of mine, family, everybody, ups and downs, positive transformation stories, a lot of obviously, unfortunately, sad stories. But one of the reasons I was very excited to have you on the show is because you're one of those examples of people who found a way to make use of their time in COVID in a way that is filled with growth, taking risks. You started a company that is not your first company. So we'll get to your past career as well. But what's really exciting about the company that you just started is that not only was it born out of the pandemic and the capacity we had, but it was also inspired by the pandemic's challenges and kind of what shed light on the existing offerings that are in the market for how we should protect ourselves as consumers and the challenges and the kind of shortcomings of these offerings. So, without further ado, your company is Palma de Salus.
Yes.
Did I pronounce it correctly?
Yes, you pronounced it perfectly.
So what is Palma de Salus? Let's start with, we'll get to the bunch of topics that I want to talk to you about, but let's start with this one. What is Palma de Salus? How did you come up with the idea? And where are you at this point in your journey?
Yeah, so it's really interesting that Palma really did come out of the pandemic. And interestingly, right after previously I was at Careem for more than 3 years, and my original plan was to open skincare clinics in Saudi. And I was really excited about it, and I started the groundwork. I started finding partners, finding the right real estate, and that was January and February of 2020. Mm-hmm. And as the world would have it, in March 2020, everything shut down. Flights shut down. I think me and you were on one of the last flights back from
Saudi.
Riyadh to Dubai.
Wow.
And khalas, the world changed.
Yeah.
And what was really interesting is I was in a bit of disarray because this was my game plan.
Yeah.
I had left my job and this is what I was going to do. And I was like, what now?
Yeah.
And weirdly, I think in many ways, Palma manifested itself because the original plan with the skincare clinic was to do something that I was passionate about with people that I cared about doing it with. And that's what I wanted out of building a business.
Right.
And the way that Palma came about, our founder's story, is we were in City Walk at Expectation, and there was this really nasty hand sanitizer that was on the table. And me and my friends that we had just gone, I think, to a berries class, and we had a tradition, we were called the Saturdays, that after the berries class, we would go and just have brunch together, all sweaty and disgusting. And when we were kind of playing with this hand sanitizer, we were like, this is just an awful experience.
Yeah.
Everything about it. It smells like tequila, it's runny, it's sticky. And we walked back from the brunch place, we went back to my apartment, and we literally sat on my balcony, me and my 2 business school friends, their 2 partners, and there was 5 of us, and we just sat thinking, what can we do about this?
Wow.
And I think we got a lot of inspiration because my cousin started a premium hot sauce brand that's called Truff, and all he did was, he did a lot, but he created a luxury version of something that existed. So in the US, most of hot sauces are $5. Mm-hmm. He created a $15 to $20 version and just did premium packaging. And now it's a super well-known brand. They're doing really well. And I took a lot of inspiration from that. So I thought, and this was really March 2020, let's create a brand out of this.
Yeah.
Let's create premium packaging. Let's make sure that we can actually create a product that's better in every way than what exists. And let's just launch it and have fun with it. And I think that was really our whole thing. Let's just launch and have fun and build a brand. And I think I drew inspiration from brands.
Yeah.
Like, I love brands.
I mean, the name of your company itself is an incredible brand. It's I only learned about the meaning of the name of your company earlier this afternoon. Palma de Salus. What is it? I mean, for those who are listening and watching, what does it mean?
Yeah, so Palma it comes from palm. So in Middle Eastern, the Hamza is a sign of protection.
Uh-huh.
And so it's palm, and then de is of, and Salus is the Roman goddess of health and prosperity.
Right.
So if you combine it all together, it's the protection of the goddess that's sort of leading you towards safety. And it's fun when you think of brand and the fact that there's a Roman goddess in the same way that Nike is the goddess of victory. People don't know that.
I did not know that.
Yeah, Nike's the goddess of victory.
What, like Greek god of victory, or what? Like
I don't know if it's Greek or Roman, but
Okay.
it's one or the other.
Okay.
Hermes is also a god. Aesop comes like there's so many different brands that actually come from mythology.
Yeah.
And it's how do you build a brand kind of around that? For me, to be honest, we wanted to name the brand Salus forever.
Yeah.
And for me, the name Salus is just beautiful. Like
Yeah.
the meaning behind it. And for the longest time, we were going to call it Salus. But the beauty of launching a brand in the US is you have to look at trademarks.
Of course, IP and all that, right?
IP. So then when we looked at Salus, it was taken for what we wanted it to be. So then we scrambled. Like we got in huge discussions. We had like 250 different names of what we wanted to call the brand.
Yeah.
And then we landed on Palma. And we were like, oh, this is great. Let's do Palma. And then we reached out to our IP lawyer. Same thing, trademark issues on it. And so we ended up calling it Palma de Salus
So you got away
to
from
combine both of them.
And so you can get away from those IP things that's fantastic, by the way. It has also the intonation of a high value brand. It's like, it sounds like it's a high value brand, right? But it has a nice sound to it, Palma de Salus, right? But that's a cool way to go about a company, because most people, I mean, I always see, I have a bunch of friends, a lot of ex-colleagues who are starting companies, and I always wonder, and of course me included, like sometimes I wonder what is the framework by which I want to start a company. And so obviously there's the impact and the problem you want to solve. I love what you said earlier, which is the people you're going to work with, the adventure you're going to have, and how much fun you're going to have with it. But what I really like about the way you went about this particular business is that it didn't at least take into consideration as a primary or main objective the commercial volume opportunity. You went for the unaddressed niche, which is the top of the pyramid. So like most businesses are trying to get maximum number of customers, maximum revenue, maximum market share. And what ends up happening is, in your case, as I understand it, with hand sanitizers, one of the most commonly used products in the pandemic, is that they all suck. And there is nothing designed and produced for the high value customers that want a perfect experience when they wash their hands with sanitizers. So it's a cool framework to actually like kind of, I'll let you guys all like compete over the rest of the pyramid. We're just going to go for the top of that pyramid.
Exactly. But that takes brand building, right? And you have to actually stand for something. You have to have a better quality for you product than just putting a nice label on something. And what's interesting about luxury in general as a market is that it always moves up the pyramid, like you were just talking about, where you do start with a basic level of something, and then you notice that segments are created, and segments want better quality.
Yeah.
So even simple things like healthcare services, you can go to basic hospitals. Basic hospitals were the way that things started. Now you've moved up into luxury hospitals.
Yeah, private practices.
Private practices, all of that, just because the market kind of has the flexibility to, like there's a desire and there's a need from the market. And then but what's amazing, I think, about what we're doing is there wasn't really a premium hand sanitizer market.
Yeah.
Right? So we're taking a risk and saying, we think we can create this market.
Yeah.
And when you're not competing, you're actually creating a new category.
Yeah. You're kind of creating a new market for it, right?
Exactly.
Because up until you guys started, people just wanted to make sure their hands are clean.
Exactly.
Doesn't matter if it smells, doesn't matter if it's sticky. So I love the way you're talking about the brand, but tell us a little bit more about the product itself.
Yeah, so the product itself is a huge labor of love. So our game plan was, this was March 2020. We were going to get this product out by the end of the year. That was the plan. Fast forward 18 months later, that's when it actually ended up launching. And a lot of it came from, so the product itself, we developed it. So my co-founder is a doctor. Her name's Aradna. And so she sat in the lab with the chemists working on every piece of the formulation.
Yeah.
So she's like a master of details.
She's a chiropractor too, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And what's amazing about her is she, in many ways, is just my complement because she is so detail-oriented and I am sometimes out in the clouds, that she's really the perfect person that could have created this.
Yeah.
And in doing that, she created a product that, like, even the first time I tried it, I was like, whoa, this is so cool.
I want to clean my hands all the time now.
It smelled amazing. It's actually a lotion. And to me, that was a new category because I just thought, hey, we're just going to get a nice, I didn't know actually what was going to come out of it.
Yeah.
Because in many ways, I thought about it in terms of, look, all the hand sanitizer I ever tried were awful.
Yeah.
Who the hell are we to come out and say, we're going to create a better version of this?
Sure.
And when we did, I was like, wow. And what's so cool is when you launch a brand, just the reactions you get. And now we're on Amazon and we're reading all these Amazon reviews. And when you create something and you see people that you've never interacted with, interact with the brand that you created, that you literally sat in your apartment and built up.
Right.
That's what's freaking cool.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of these kind of amazing episodes I get on Shark Tank where you got a ton of these incredible entrepreneurs who are, because somehow I think we were in Dubai and everybody's doing a tech startup and that's fine and cool and everything. But very few people are trying to come up with an innovative product, just a good old product, a direct-to-consumer product that has a very different feature or two or three or a brand or like any of the 4 Ps, that you study in college.
Business school.
Yeah, but, sometimes that's all it takes. And I guess you guys addressed it from different perspectives. You created, to use your own words, the nexus of hand sanitizers, right?
We call it the world's finest hand sanitizer.
Break it down for me. So the product is a hand sanitizer. It makes sure, so especially in COVID, we never really sanitized our hands much before COVID. So I have a couple of questions on we're in post-COVID now. People are not wearing masks as much. But the hand sanitizers that we started using almost for the first time during COVID, I think are here to stay. It's not like Netflix. People started watching Netflix during the COVID. Last earnings report, I don't know if you saw it, Netflix completely plunged because people apparently are not, watching Netflix anymore. They're going out again.
I actually, so I was in Silicon Valley when that Netflix earnings came out.
Yeah.
And I have a very different perspective on it. Is Netflix didn't have that many competitors beforehand. Now they have Disney Plus, they have Hulu.
They had Hulu though. Yeah.
But Hulu wasn't formidable.
Yeah.
They weren't a proper competitor. And now all of these streaming services realized how much money they can make from this.
Yeah.
And that's why Netflix, and also Netflix is silly because, me, my sister, my mom, and my dad all have the same exact Netflix password.
Yeah, their business model can be hijacked. You're right. They probably prioritized scale over anything. Another example is Amazon. I saw Ghassan Halazon's post recently about how Amazon for the first time is reporting a decline in sales. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that there are, and that's compared to the pandemic year, which obviously
the pandemic year was such an anomaly, right? So if we're supposed to compare year on year from 2021 to 2022,
it's inaccurate.
It's just inaccurate.
Yeah.
Everything was off.
Yeah.
So I think it's actually just unfair to report year on year.
Absolutely. And it's either that this product was used on an exceptional high demand basis because people were at home. So the right measurement would be before the pandemic, or it was stopped being used altogether because it was a pandemic, outdoor locations, entertainment, nightclubs, whatever it is. But when it comes to hand sanitizers, are you already seeing consistent demand just as much as you saw pre-pandemic, or is it too early to tell, if people are still using hand sanitizers?
So look, it's definitely declining from where it was in 2020. But what's interesting that's happened is that the level of personal hygiene has just increased globally. So now, if you go to a restaurant and you don't see a hand sanitizer, you're like, what kind of place is this?
Right. Wow. That's amazing.
And you realize that it's just there, right? Whether people are really using it as much as they used to when they were so fearful, but it is a product. What we're amazed at, and this is actually what makes our jobs difficult, is trying to prioritize what market we want to go after. Do we want to do hotels? Do we want to do restaurants? Because it's a product that is literally everywhere.
Yeah.
And no other product, I think, in my opinion, is so ubiquitous all over the world.
It's almost because it mentions direct to consumer, I think either on your website or LinkedIn. I can't see where. And one of the first questions I was thinking is like, how is this not a B2B product, right? So you're still in discovery mode, I assume, right? You're trying to figure out whether, because I can totally see how it can be direct to consumer. I mean, just like any other high value moisturizer for your hand or whatever. But you're right. Like businesses are just, what restaurant doesn't have hand sanitizer when you walk in? I mean, the pandemic has created OCD out of everybody. Imagine what happened to the people who are already OCD.
And I think what's interesting about what you just mentioned is, how is this not B2B? We pitch to investors, this is a D2C brand. We're doing direct to consumer. By the way, the Middle East, there's not one direct to consumer brand.
Right.
Which we can get into talking to, which I think is absurd. And the Middle East market of investors doesn't even understand direct to consumer.
Yeah.
Where and that's a whole different thing. But what's interesting about launching a startup is you have all these assumptions about who you think your customer is and where you think you're going to sell and at what price points, what people are going to be excited about, what they're going to say. And then you launch and it's bonkers different.
Right, yeah.
So for us, what we found is our main market so far has actually been B2B. And thankfully, we have the margins built into the business because we wanted to always try and go into retailers in the long term that we're fine on that scale. But if you don't build in contingencies for what you assumed what your market would be, kind of be screwed.
Yeah, I feel like the biggest cushion you need at that early stage of a startup is enough cushion to try out different things so that you don't run out of liquidity, cash, money for sure. Yeah, especially if you're funded guy. Are you still funded or self-funded at this point?
We have a few investors.
Okay, cool. I mean, but even at that early stage, I remember from my days, hundreds of thousands of dollars you can go through them very quickly.
Oh yeah.
And you should be frugal, but also at the same time, you can't be frugal at the expense of like market discovery. So it's a little bit of a catch-22. Like you can't go through your money very quickly, like dump it all in one channel and like go crazy. But at the same time, you need to actually not sit and be, not because you're keeping that money for yourself, but you need to spend that money in a smart way and to discover the different channels and where it has the biggest adoption. I would imagine businesses like restaurants, as you said, or hotels will probably go through like, I don't know, how do you call it? Like a pack or like a packaging, or what's your SKUs like?
So we have 300 ml is our main product.
So I imagine in like a food location or a busy restaurant, like they go through like one of these like in a week, maybe if not in a day or a few days, right?
It depends if they have it all on tables or if they have it at the front of house.
Yeah.
Or if they have it in their bathrooms.
So let's go back to the actual product. What is it exactly? It's not just a hand sanitizer.
So what's amazing is Aradna created a lotion that sanitizes. And that's like a brand new category because no one was really in that space. And for us, we wanted to 10x everything about hand sanitizer. And a really big portion was the moisturizing properties. What people don't know is that your hands are the second most thing that age on your body after your face. So if you look at your hand, a lot of times people do fillers and Botox and all of these things, but they always say if you really want to know how old someone is, if you want to look at your hands.
My God, you're right. It looks like a 90-year-old's hand.
No, they don't. Well, you need some Palma then.
Go on.
And it really is also just an education piece about that, where the product itself is actually it's anti-aging. Mm-hmm. For your hands, and it has all the same properties that you would actually put on your face, on your hands. And a lot of people actually, what hand sanitizers did is the alcohol contents really dried people's hands. People started developing eczema, and they started developing all like really, crackly skin.
Sure.
And we wanted to just counter that. We wanted it to be a product that not only protects, but also nourishes. So a product that you're using, we don't want it just to have one function. Yeah. For it to have multifunction. And for you, like our whole thesis of what we're creating is elevating everyday essentials.
Right.
So the things that you use every single day, there's no reason they shouldn't be great. So the next products we're launching are eczema creams. Like I have eczema and I have to use this nasty cream every single day that makes me feel diseased. Why can't the product be beautiful?
Organic and natural.
Yeah. Why is it that skincare and beauty has evolved in terms of packaging, in terms of brands, but no healthcare brands have really come up in terms of the stuff that you see in the drugstore? Like all of the drugstore products, they're all basic.
Yeah. Is it because you think these big brands are trying to go for a mass scale, kind of like what can sell the highest amount of volume, and so they overlook these kind of, let's say, bespoke products? Is this?
You mean the drugstore brands?
Oh, yeah, exactly. The kind of like the mass scale products that don't seem to address the problems that you guys are addressing. Is it because they're trying to sell maximum number of people, maximum volume? So they're like, oh, this kind of bespoke product, we don't have time for that. Let somebody else do that. Like, we're just going to take care of the masses here.
Yeah, because they also have to deal with shelf space.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And like what sells on a shelf is more of the mass.
Yeah.
Whereas when you do something on your own and build a direct-to-consumer brand, you can play a bit more.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
Because you're not constrained by what's physically on a shelf.
Right. Last time we went out for breakfast, you were mentioning also how you were addressing not just the smell and the texture and the ingredients, but also like the full experience of like, even when you squeeze a hand sanitizer, sometimes it splashes on you. So like, what was it like to like not come from a product design, product engineering background and get into these kind of like nuances about not just the actual chemical inside, not the chemical, right? The substance inside, but the full packaging, the full product experience, the 5 seconds where you're pressing on the thing. Like that was one of the areas that you guys addressed as well, right?
Yeah. So one of them is the perfect amount. So a lot of times when you put hand sanitizer, it's also not the perfect amount. You either put too much and it starts running, and then you find your friend and you go put hand sanitizer on them because you're annoyed, or you just kind of let it drip.
That's crazy. So true, by the way. Or it splashes everywhere.
Or it splashes, and it's just like I think the beauty of it is you just never know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
And what we wanted to do is exactly what you're going to get.
Yeah. So you studied the amount that comes out per squeeze, basically?
Oh, yeah, the pump. Like how much.
The pump.
Because you can actually optimize the pump amount that comes out, and we wanted to make sure that it actually covers your entire hand and that it still has the efficacy of it.
Right.
And it's not too much, it's not too little. And what's really interesting is we got some inquiry from a private jet company because they had hand sanitizers in their, I guess, in the private jets.
Uh-huh.
And what was happening is the alcohol from the hand sanitizer that they were using in the jets was ruining the leather seats.
Wow.
Yeah. So then they were like, oh, we want to have Palma there because Palma won't drip on these leather seats and ruin them and cause all these stains.
That's crazy.
Isn't that crazy?
How much does it sell for, the 300 ml?
So it's 240 dirhams.
Okay, that's what is that, $80, $70?
It's $65.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I can see how I could have a Palma in my house,
That's the point. The point is
I'm a humble guy, but
we recognize that there will always be the normal hand sanitizer that people use, but we're going after the crowd that buys Aesop.
Right. Yeah.
The crowd that is willing to pay a bit more for their fancy hand sanitizer for when their friends come over, and kind of saying, you know what, I want to give my guests more, and I want to even give myself more.
Yeah. So this is interesting. Actually, this is a good segue into addressing this particular segment of customers. Compared to your last startup, which I didn't even know that about until I looked you up on LinkedIn. I mean, we've been friends since the first time I met you was when we were 16 years old.
Yeah.
And I feel like I've known you
Amman summers.
We were roommates for a short period of time, friends, at one point colleagues. I feel like I know you very well, but I didn't know you sold a startup that was a Series A funded startup in the fashion world, e-commerce, right?
Yes.
So we're gonna venture out a little bit into the overarching startup entrepreneurship topic here, but. My first question is, that other startup that you had sold, what was it called?
It was called Bonfair.
Bonfair, right? And that was kind of addressing probably the total opposite segment, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, up-and-coming artists, designers, selling fashion. Correct me if I'm butchering this.
No, you're not butchering it.
Right, so it's up-and-coming fashion designers coming up with clothing items that would then sell to probably the customers who would buy clothing from up-and-coming artists, as opposed to Louis Vuitton or Dior or whatever, right?
So it's a little different. So what we did at Bonfair is we helped brands become discoverable. And what was interesting is we did this in 2011, before Instagram was kind of popping up, and we brought up-and-coming designers online. And our whole thing was that we would only bring brands online that had stories. So the brand had to have a story, because if it didn't have a story and it was an up-and-coming brand, no one was going to buy it.
Yeah.
So we were really mixing content and community. And what we did is we would go to the trade shows in Paris, in Milan, in LA, London, New York, wherever these trade shows were. The best one was in Paris by far.
Mm-hmm.
And then meet with all these different designers and asked them if they'd be interested in coming to the American market if they weren't there already. And it was really merging content and commerce and bringing it together. But that was such a different experience because it was in the Valley.
Yeah.
And what was amazing about that startup is, we raised $4 million with a napkin idea. There was nothing built. We didn't have any users. And that's, I think, the big difference in the ecosystem in the Valley or in the US in general versus the Middle East.
You got acquired by Moda Operandi, right?
Yeah, so Moda Operandi is, they're like legends in the e-commerce space.
Uh-huh. And so, but this is an interesting point you raise, which is how you could create a company, back of the envelope valuation, raise $4 million. Before you even get to traction and growth, you're already in acquisition mode. And that's exactly what I wanted to kind of, one of the things I want to talk to you about is when entrepreneurs decide to become entrepreneurs and start a company. I feel like one way to categorize it, and this is fresh out of a conversation I had recently with a friend who is an entrepreneur, is some people are out there to start a company and flip it as quickly as possible. So come up with a proof of concept, maybe a patent if you're doing something outside of tech especially. And before you even have to worry about growth and traction and all this painful stuff, you create something, the infrastructure, the license, whatever it might be, perhaps a proof of concept. And before you even need to worry about all the tough stuff, which is to grow a company, you go find a buyer. Then you have other types of entrepreneurs. I feel like that's one way to categorize them. I'm sure there's a bunch of ways, who are in it for the long run. They're not here to start a company and sell it as quickly as possible. They love the problem. They're passionate about the journey, the team. And I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer here, because I feel like the first category is just a bunch of smart hustlers who found an opportunity, flipped a couple of $1 million in less than a year because they got a head start before anybody else did. And they're on to something else, and it's exciting and fresh. And then the other ones are disciplined, almost like admirable, right? Because they're in it for the long run. They have, a very admirable routine and discipline. And I guess you've seen quite a few of those. It sounds like the first company that you sold was a quick flip, or was
it was like 4 years.
Oh, it was 4 years. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I misunderstood then.
No. So we actually never built it to sell it.
Uh-huh.
And I think when you're an entrepreneur and you're constantly thinking of who's going to buy me, that to me is a short-term mindset.
Yeah.
And Obama actually has a quote that says, if all you're in it for money, then that shows a lack of ambition. And that always struck with me, because it's kind of just thinking through the fact of, if you're constantly just thinking about money, you're not building the company in the way that is true probably to yourself, and also being able to build something that really does have impact. Of course, there's these like short-term entrepreneurs that are sitting there trying to like just flip companies. But the companies that live the longest and the ones that genuinely do have the impact are the ones that are built to last.
Yeah.
If you use, I think it's like the Jim Collins book, Built to Last.
Right.
And one of my favorite entrepreneurs, in the region, and this is cliche at this point, but I did work for him, is Mudassir from Careem.
Yeah.
And what's amazing is I actually saw something today. He had on LinkedIn, he was being interviewed by some McKinsey partner. He was previously at McKinsey, about Careem and its long-term ambitions. And he said this when we used to work there, but it was really refreshing to see just how consistent he is. How he said we've only accomplished 1% of what we need to address the market that we want to. People think, oh wow, Careem's like, they've made it, they've killed it.
Yeah.
And I think when you're actually an entrepreneur that believes in the mission that you're trying to build, you never think it's done. Because there's always new ways of tackling the problem, and there's always new technologies that come up, and there's always just new ways of looking at the business and growing it. And you can grow a business, in adjacencies, you can grow it vertically, horizontally, in different ways. And I think when you're just always looking to sell something, it's a lack of ambition.
So in an ideal case, you want to build a company where you're so passionate about a problem, and the problem is so large to solve quickly that you are committed to it. I guess I've been recently trying to avoid saying there is one right or wrong answer, but let's say one great answer of how entrepreneurship should be pursued is devotion and genuine attachment to the problem you're solving, so that it's not a matter of making money quickly, but a matter of solving that problem that is so large and complex over time. And that problem is never going to be solved quickly enough, that you're going to have to keep on figuring out ways to keep on tackling it and fixing it and optimizing it. And obviously that's very it sounds great, right? Like, however, money being a motivator, or it almost requires a lot of enlightenment as a human being to care so much about a problem where you don't care enough about the money, especially if you're not like well off from the get-go. And starting to think a little bit about like what incentivizes us as human beings. And I wonder, I listened to like Chamath Palihapitiya and Naval Ravikant. I don't know
Love
if you know.
him.
I'm a big fan of these two
Yeah.
guys, especially.
I've seen him talk in the Valley.
Right. And they both sort of, I think, come to, they say it in different ways, but I think they both agree that you gotta learn how to get rich and get that. And once you figure that out, then you need to, then you have the capacity to learn to become meaningful and happy, because happiness might be more hedonistic, but being meaningful is kind of more sustainable. But it's hard for somebody to be right out of the gate seeking meaning and impact when they haven't gotten rich and wealthy enough to be comfortable. So then you start to ask yourself as an entrepreneur, how much can we expect from up and coming entrepreneurs, first time trying to start a company, to prioritize impact over money versus money over impact? You know what I mean?
So look, to be fair, I think maybe I was being a bit flippant with sharing just, you have to have passion and then khalas, the company will be fine. It really does also come down to the fact that if you're solving a problem that's worth solving, the money will come.
Yeah.
And that's probably the better way of looking at it, where if whatever the problem is, as long as you're addressing a market need and doing it in a way that's superior, customers will come and you'll build a business. And sometimes it's actually being patient with that process. And a lot of times people just want to exit things really quickly because they don't see the quick returns on it.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes, like you mentioned before, about actually experimenting with different ways to solve the problem, as long as you know it's a real problem.
Yeah.
Right? But people get bored, right? Like
People
in the
get bored.
day.
They got burnt out.
Yeah,
as well.
they get burnt out. And like, there's so many things about reasons to leave businesses. And each one's personal. And I think the one thing that I've at least learned is you should never judge anyone's journey.
Yeah.
So whatever journey someone's on, that's for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I talked to, I'm referencing again this conversation I had with a friend who has almost intelligently reduced his journey to, I got to get rich first before I worry about other stuff. And that answer seemed smart because it was like trying to figure out the existential question of what this whole thing about and how to optimize my time to be most impactful is a little bit outside of my vicinity at this moment. And I'm somebody who struggles with this question. I'm not wealthy enough to like do whatever the fuck I want to do yet, but I almost don't want to waste my time chasing the money when I should be, based on my theory, trying to find the problem that I care about the most. It could be my community, my country, whatever it is, and just go for it. And by the way, it may not even be a business. It could be ideally, like I don't even give a shit about the money as long as I can live and die comfortably, but I'm solving this problem. Like this is like the most noble, ideal, I would think. These are the people who are like, they don't care about the money at all. They could even make money if they want to, but they care enough about a problem that's what matters to them. Like whether they make money or not is secondary. Like it's entirely about the problem, even if it means they make 100K a year and that's it, right?
I think it just comes down to personality type.
Right.
Right? Like there's definitely the personality type that's telling you it's just priorities also in life. If that's your number one priority, I'm sure you'll make very different decisions. And you might not be very passionate about what you're doing, but you can probably make a lot of money doing it. And I know we talked about this because you're an ex-consultant and I'm an ex-consultant. A lot of times people sacrifice passion just to make money.
Yeah.
Right?
Or to stay in their comfort zone.
Or to stay in their comfort zone, or to really just, it's just their priority, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes, I see it all the time, most of the people that are miserable in their lives are because they've chosen money as their motivator for work.
Yeah.
I don't want to say miserable in their lives, miserable in their work lives.
I would add to that, it's like money, they could probably, sometimes I look at these, like, I look at colleagues of mine who are miserable in consulting, and they've been talking about leaving consulting for so long.
All of them.
All of them. And they could make more money outside of consulting. That makes me wonder, like, so is it about the money or is it about the fear to fail if you leave your comfort zone?
I think it's the interesting thing about consulting is that they take really smart minds in, right? And I mean, maybe we shouldn't say this, but
go for it.
The way they always said it is whoever ends up in consulting is usually the middle 50. The bottom 25 get kicked out because it's up or out. And then the top 25 go on and go do something else.
Sure, yeah.
Because they realize they want to go do something else with their lives. And then what really ends up staying is
brilliant, by the way. Who said that?
someone from BCG, actually.
I love it so much.
when I was considering leaving. And also BCG was an awful fit for me. But in general, it was told to me. And I thought that was a really interesting way of thinking about it, that the middle really ends up, and there's no judgment on the people that end up staying there. But it really does come down to comfort, and it comes down to the easiest path to make money. And what was interesting is when I was at INSEAD, the head of McKinsey always comes to INSEAD because I think it's a managing director, ends up coming because they end up recruiting a lot of people from INSEAD to join their firm.
Yeah.
And one person asked him, like, hey, you know, you've been telling me all these amazing reasons why to join consulting. Why should I not join consulting? Like, give me some reason.
Steel mining, basically, yeah.
And then they were like, well, if you're willing to take risks and you're smart, this is probably not the place that you'll make the most money.
Yeah.
So you should probably go look elsewhere. And I actually thought that was a pretty fun way of thinking about it.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's definitely not for the risk. Any corporate job, for that matter, that is safe, safe job security. You get your paycheck at the end of the month. And again, no judgment. I agree. You have people who are risk averse, and you have people who are willing to take the plunge. I gotta say though, as somebody who has worked in consulting, loved it, hated it. It was a love-hate relationship for sure. But the skills that, actually one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, do you think it was worth it? I mean, you've spent maybe about a year or 2 years in BCG. I spent about 6 years in total, and I'm still working in the consulting space, even though I'm not a consultant anymore, but I'm staffing them. But I find the skills that I developed, even though a lot of them were fancy, as they call it in a few times, one of my managers called it intellectual masturbation, right? Like it sometimes feels like it's exactly what that is, right? Overpriced, hyped up analysis. But and many times, and I think a lot of people don't give enough credit to consultants because it looks like they're just not doing much. And a lot of times they're really not. But sometimes the clients are so messy with their own data and analysis that consultants are needed to come and structure things. And these skills go a long way. Like if I have a kid right now, and I'm not even close to having a kid, but if I have a kid who is, let's say, about to get into he or she are about to get into their careers, consulting would be definitely one of the places I would like put my kid in, or encourage them to get into it, because 2 or 3 years of management consulting, tough and hard as it might be, go a long, long way, like more than anything else, in my opinion. But I don't know what your thoughts are on this.
So it's interesting you say that. My sister, right out of university, went to McKinsey. So she went to Columbia, and then she ended up at McKinsey. And I agree with you that it's a great school, right? So anything that really kicks your ass and makes you develop a work ethic young is a good school. Because if you end up in one of these, when you're 21, 22, you end up in kind of like a floozy job type, where you don't have many responsibilities other than like getting coffee and like writing other people's emails,
photocopying papers,
one, you probably don't learn that much, and then you probably aren't developing that same intense type of work ethic and working with smart people. And I think once you actually start, quote unquote, working with people that you keep learning from, you don't accept anything less. And that's the standard that you get used to. And I think in that reason that consulting is an amazing school. I think right when you get out of university, I don't want to say I made a mistake, because I don't think I made a mistake, because you're right, I did learn a skill set that I didn't have at all because I was an entrepreneur before. But I think I think I went in when I was maybe 28, you just have less time for bullshit.
Right.
In terms of the hierarchy of it. So previously I was in my own startup, whatever I did that day, translated that day. I ended up moving from being in my own startup in San Francisco, shorts and t-shirt, like go to work when I kind of wanted to, knowing that I did my own work, with the team, of course.
That's the best, by the way.
Oh my gosh. It was great because you felt in control of your life.
Yeah.
And I think what ended up happening, at least to me on a personal level, is I joined BCG right after INSEAD, which was, INSEAD's like a riot and a wonderful place to be. And then the first thing that happens is I get shipped off to Saudi on a 5 a.m. flight every single Sunday. And I don't feel in control of my life anymore. And working on one of the visions of Vision 2030 or something like that, and it was 2015. I couldn't connect. And I think I knew within the first, probably even couple weeks, I tell myself couple months, but within the first couple weeks, I was like, this is just not for me.
Yeah.
And I stayed because I wanted to learn the skill set, because in many ways, like you just mentioned, I really admire the skill set.
Yeah.
Because I think structuring problems, learning how to solve things is amazing.
Sitting down with board members, presenting a strategy, like all that stuff, right?
All of it's really amazing. But at some point, if you're deeply unhappy somewhere, you have to leave. Like for your own mental health, for your own mental well-being, it's just not worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, consulting has its own way of stressing you out, with definitely stealing your control and your freedom. Like even some of the things where like, I'm done with work, I've delivered what I got to do, it's time for me to go have dinner and go to the room. No, you got to sit down with your team in the room because we're one team. And, you know, to some extent, that's like also kind of the solidarity is interesting. But sometimes it gets past that too, and it's just like FaceTime for the sake of FaceTime and staying till 12 a.m. despite you being productive and efficient and getting the work done. And you're not even picking up more work on behalf of your colleague, because then it'll be fine. It's like we're in it together. But just sticking around because you're gonna have to, or like having to just be part of this bureaucratic system because it's just how it's supposed to be. You don't ask any questions. You're getting paid a lot of money. Shut up and shut up. You know, it's a lot of that bullshit.
And you have nice expense accounts, and you're staying at the Ritz.
You sell your soul to the devil. You know, so it's got its own.
I feel like we're really consulting bashing.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, look, I obviously, like a lot of my clients are still consulting firms, but nothing we're saying here is exclusive to consulting, because the same as in banking or law firms to some extent. Anything that's got a suit on and like a $200,000 paid annual salary is probably has the same challenges, right? The same issues.
You know what's interesting about that? Yeah. The reason you get overpaid is because they know you're miserable.
Right.
Because these fashion careers, if you go work at Chanel or you go work at LV, they'll pay you nothing, but they'll know that you're passionate about it.
Right.
So you're actually getting paid for your hardship.
Yeah.
And that, when you figure that out, I think that's fascinating.
100%. But the cool thing is, entrepreneurship is also not, you have to pay a price to be an entrepreneur as well. Maybe it's a different type of stress. Maybe it's a different type of mental health issues that you need to worry about. Perhaps it's the risk, right? It's a totally different problem to worry about. Like in consulting, it's like, I got to sleep 3 hours, I have a presentation, a deadline, but I'm getting paid one way or another, right? Whether I do a good job or a bad job, maybe I get fired, but like still, the risk is so much lower than starting a company. Either way, I guess taking a step back, if you're a management consultant, if you are in a busy job, if you're starting a company, when the stress piles up, one thing I'm starting to really examine at this point in my life, 37 years old, not young, you know, I'm not
you're
old
young.
either.
Of course you're young.
But I would like to believe I'm old enough to have figured these questions out at an earlier age. Like if I could have, I would have liked to, but let's say that's fine. I mean, it's never too late. So I'm still discovering how to cope with stress and how to cope with all these negative emotions, which are, I'm bored, I'm lacking passion, I'm burnt out. You know, fortunately for the last, and ironically as well, you know, the financial part was not a concern because I got lucky, whatever, but like other issues were, and I still coped with them in ways that I consider to be not the best ways to cope with issues. For example, going for the bottle of wine when a day has been tough, or binging on social media. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is you as an entrepreneur, as an ex-consultant, as an INSEAD top business school alumni, from your personal experience, but also having been around a bunch of startups, mentoring them through 500 startups and like just seeing people around you, what have you learned about managing your mental state, your spiritual state, and just your wellness altogether, physically, mentally, emotionally, when you're going through stress? I don't know if you have some stories of your own that you want to share with people around you, of kind of what inspired you or taught you how to learn how to cope with things in the most optimal way, or perhaps you want to chime in on some of your good habits or bad habits and how you go with it.
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend to be the expert in stress, just because I don't want to say constantly stressed out, but I'm often stressed out about things. And I think a lot of that actually comes with just and I will call it like the burdens of entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. The uncertainty that exists behind it. And what you were just saying, yes, you're right. Like if you're in one of these high paying jobs, you don't have to worry about, you know, customers the next day, whatever reviews come in, investors kind of breathing down your throat for things. So you're, as much as I would like to say entrepreneurship is being in control, you're actually not that in control, because you still have, like, you might be in control of your time, but you're not in control of like the uncertainty of that comes with it. And I mean, one of the things that I'm like particularly really just passionate about in general is just mental health and how to manage yourself. And what you were just saying is, you know, you're at a certain age and you're trying to figure it out. I think your life is just a constant discovery phase. So you'll constantly be discovering things about yourself. And when you look back and you think about the person that you were 5 years ago and maybe you're embarrassed about it, to me, that's amazing, because that means you've grown.
Right.
So that means that if you tell yourself, ugh, I don't know how I did that 5 years ago, amazing.
Yeah.
Because you've recognized that there's a better way of doing things. And I think that process is something that you will continually go through in life. Yeah. There's always, like in California, they always say, if you're not embarrassed by the person you were a year ago, it's a pretty wasted year.
Oh, you're not doing much, basically. Yeah.
You're just not growing.
Yeah.
Right? So I also think that's why when you put things out, and there's no reason to be fearful of things, because you'll be a different person in a year. Or I hope that you're a different person in a year.
Yeah.
But the thing about stress is recognizing how to be able to cope in healthy ways.
Right.
And there's a lot of unhealthy ways to be able to do it. And sometimes it actually requires sometimes there's interventions that actually end up happening because people are being really self-destructive in their states, right? Either becoming like insane workaholics and they just, khalas, like nothing else in their world matters. And they're destructive to their personal relationships because of their work lives.
Yeah.
And that ends up becoming detrimental. And many ways, that's why you have friends, that's why you have family to be able to intervene. But for me, the ways that I cope is, this sounds silly, but just exercise. Like exercise, if I don't exercise, I don't know, for whatever reason, I get sad. Yeah. Like I can sink into a depression pretty, like within a month if I'm actually not exercising. And I think it actually comes from the fact that I grew up playing sports my entire life. And then I even played sports in college. Like I played lacrosse. I played lacrosse at Michigan. And then I graduated from college and I stopped playing sports every day for like 2 hours a day. And then I kind of sunk and I was like, what is this? Yeah. And
because you also get your body used to a certain amount of endorphins that your body, like your hormones, that you release, happy hormones, right?
I'm hooked. Khalas. And I know for a fact that I am hooked.
And that's one of the ways that are not positive, like by far. Like there's nobody that ever worked out a little too much and regretted it, or like that was a workout I regret, or that I worked out a little too hard. Like nobody ever says that after a workout, right? Like, so it's definitely a safe way to deal with any state of stress. I mean,
But I think that one's obvious, right?
Don't work out in a way that ruins your joints or injures you. But aside of that, a safe workout is always a net positive way to go about things, right?
Yeah. But I think the other thing that like is really stressful in our lives is us constantly being on.
Yeah.
So I always think back about not even that long ago, like not even the 2000s, right? Like we didn't have phones on us.
Yeah.
And that was 22 years ago.
It's crazy. Huh?
And the fact that now you're constantly connected to a device and people can reach you at any time and you feel a sense of responsibility. Like this sounds awful, but I'm delayed in responding to like probably more than 10 friends right now about different messages.
Yeah, on WhatsApp, marking unread messages.
Unread probably from like 3 weeks ago, which is really a bit sad. But it's just, you're constantly connected.
Yeah.
And back in in 1980, you would go to work and then if someone needed to reach you, they would call your house phone and that's it. And you wouldn't take work home because you didn't have computers.
Yeah.
And now it's just like, I travel with I just came down here. I have my laptop and my phone and what am I going to do when I go home? Go check my Slack, check all the notifications, write 10 emails. That didn't exist. So I think the reason that our constant life is stressed is because we have an always on culture.
You had that amazing awareness to be like, if this is going to be around me, I'm probably going to look at it. So let me distance myself from it. No, but that's amazing, by the way, because truth is, I mean, one of the things you do as a human being is when you realize you're at your weakest when you're around those temptations.
Yeah.
Say if somebody, for example, is trying to get sober from drinking, you don't send that person to a bar where it's a happy hour every hour. Or in all our cases, right? Technology around us is constantly hijacking our attention.
Totally.
So the awareness that you have to be like, I'm putting my phone away. It's a podcast. I don't want to have a notification pop up and make me first. That's what I think, to echo what you were saying earlier, realizing your weaknesses and finding the healthy ways to avoid them and just be better than I was yesterday is already a win.
Yeah, but Yazan, I think the interesting thing about phones is how destructive they are.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I used to do is my phone was by my bed and it was my alarm. So I would actually, before I went to bed, I would I'd read a bunch of articles on like Apple News, articles that were not really useful for my life. It was more just like, clickbait that I would get from BuzzFeed or CNN or whatever it was. And that was the last thoughts that I had before I went to sleep. And usually the news is destructive, right? If it bleeds, it leads. And therefore, it's not leaving your mind in your most restful state in a positive state. So I'm like a huge Oprah disciple. And one of the things that she recommends is don't sleep with your phone. And more importantly, before you go to bed, write 3 things that you're grateful for.
Yeah.
And when you put your mind in that state of gratitude before you go to bed, that's like your restful period. That's 8 hours.
Yeah, it's very hard to be anxious when you're in a grateful state.
It's hard. And then, you might find this funny, but I genuinely recognize my addiction to my phone.
Yeah.
And I have a device that I bought on Amazon where I put my phone in it and it locks the phone so that you can't open it until the timer's done. Because I would pick up my phone, because iPhone can actually tell you how many times you pick it up.
Yeah.
Like probably, 10 times, maybe even 20 times in an hour.
Yeah.
And then I also started using this thing called Pomodoro method, where you work in 25-minute increment blocks, and then you can get a 5-minute break.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I'm just distracted.
Yeah.
And when you have like a weapon of mass distraction in your hand, I came up with that. I wonder if anyone else did.
My God, I was going to say, that was amazing. Did you just come up with that right now?
I did, but I feel like I picked it up from somewhere, so I don't want to say that I did.
Incredible. We're keeping that in the podcast for sure.
But it's literally just it's mass distraction.
It is.
And there's always something new, whether your friend messaging, whether the news, and it's just your mind is not meant to be in that state.
So Russell Brand is one of those guys I love to listen to because he talks very openly about his own addictions. And this guy was like a sex freak, drug freak, he's done it
everything.
all. But then he also goes to talk about, the smartphone is clearly the iPhone. You can spend 10, 20 hours a day. Some people, like I can even go on some days up to 15 hours a day on my own iPhone.
Whoa.
But I do listen to podcasts before I sleep. My screen time is on. So it's not, I know that a lot of it is like not really me on my phone. Nevertheless, it doesn't make it any better. I am clearly spending a lot of hours on my phone. And 2 people that have shared interesting insight, or at least I came across interesting insights from them. One was Russell Brand talking about addiction to stimulation, like information stimulation, right? Doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be your phone. If you're on TV, like my dad, he's 80 something years old and he's just hooked to the TV. He'll watch TV all day. And at the end of the day, that's one way to just keep yourself busy, stimulating information, what's going on with the news, war, whatever the fuck it is. Before iPhones were around, he still can hardly use his iPhone, his smartphone. But then I had a therapist at one point who I was trying to deal with some issues, some lifestyle habits, whatnot. And this therapist happened to also be an expert on addiction. So I think at one point in our therapy session, I was like, I think he asked me like, what are you like at your best, or something about like, what's a good day look for you? And I was like, hey, when I'm not drinking or I'm not on my iPhone, I'm getting work done. I'm getting shit ton of work done, And he's like, you're a workaholic. This is called cross addiction, right? It's just, not to say that it's problematic. Even the whole term addiction, he said, is if it is problematic. Like there's no one way to define what addiction is, but one safe way to go about what is addictive is if it's problematic. Is it causing you problems in your life?
But who's deciding that it's a problem?
You can decide it. If you're honest enough with yourself, you can say, is this problematic or not? Or the people around you as well, right? So to the extent that you're honest with yourself as a person, you should be able to tell if I'm damaging or I'm harming or I'm being negligent to the people around me, including myself. But a lot of addicts are kind of aware, very few addicts, I think.
Are they though? I don't know. Like these ones that are actually usually addicted to drugs, I think they have some inclination, but they don't know how bad it is, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think a lot of times alcoholics, drug addicts, sexaholics, I'm sure there's a fancier word for that.
No, that's the one.
They know that they have some problem, but they don't think it's that bad. Gambling, right?
Sure.
Like all of these things. They know that,
Denial.
like,
Yeah.
they're just in like some sense of denial that like, it's not that bad. Like, it could be way worse.
Yeah.
And that's why that's why you need family. That's why you need friends to actually come in and chime in that this is bad. And
Right.
that's why interventions exist, right?
So you're absolutely right. I can see how a lot of people are in denial, or at least watering down their addiction to something like, maybe it's not that bad.
Bizarre.
Or I don't even have a problem, right?
Yeah.
Then you have a ton of people who like, okay, I think I have a problem. But it's hard to actually figure it out because, you know, the lifestyle's been established, the habit's been established.
Yeah.
And even though you want to do something about it, perhaps you even put yourself in a rehab center like a bunch of celebrities from Hollywood do, right? And then 2 weeks later, they're relapsing, but also picking up that habit
fun
again.
fact, the admittance rate to rehabilitation centers is 88%.
So these are the ones who do go?
Who end up, like 100 people go to rehab, and then if you, like 88 of them will go back to that same rehab.
That's fascinating. So it's a
awful.
sham, basically.
It's basically a sham. If you genuinely look at the numbers behind it, it's a sham.
And especially when how overpriced these facilities
they are more expensive than university.
Oh my God, it's a good business to start.
Because you have all these addicts, right?
Yeah.
And it just, it's awful.
And I think you're selling them something that is actually great, right? Like you send somebody off to a beautiful nature facility where there's all this attention to them and all of that. And clearly, nobody's trying to rip you off here. We're trying to help you. But the truth is, addiction is far more deeply rooted than just like 2 weeks away in nature with a couple of yoga instructors and whatever the hell they're providing you. Clearly, there's exploitation happening here for somebody that's desperate and addicted. But what I found to be interesting is my version of a good day was a day when I get a lot of work done. I make a shit ton of money. I'm productive, I'm healthy. I probably even went to the gym and I slept early. So all the kind of bad habits that I would have are out, and I just got a lot of work done. And then it was my therapist who told me, look, that's probably better than you like trading or drinking or or doing drugs or whatever the fuck you were doing. But that you should know that this is called cross addiction and this is called workaholism.
What do they want you to do instead?
So basically,
I'm like, working and going to the gym doesn't sound too bad.
Yeah, well, going to the gym certainly not, but working or finding a kick in work to the point where you're burning yourself out. Like I would work to the point where, like, if I tell you, like, my company right now, I'm pretty much running everything myself. Like, it's thank God, a very successful company, but I almost put myself in a situation where I'm doing everything myself because that's how I get my kick, my adrenaline, my rush, my utility. I get busy. So the short answer to your question is Zen. You need to learn how to be Zen. Apparently, I'm a neurotic guy. I enjoy being neurotic. I enjoy being busy. I enjoy constantly being on a treadmill. And speaking of treadmills, I'm using it metaphorically, but there is something called the hedonic treadmill.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
So then you wonder, is like being busy or being a hamster on a bigger wheel a bad thing? Because it's just like workaholism. Like I need to keep doing something, and that's just like because what happens is you lose attention of your friends and your family and the things that matter because they're just life is passing you by, and you're like, I'm trying to make money here, or like whatever you might be trying to do. I feel like this concept gets misunderstood because some people just like are chasing their tails, and others are trying to truly get something done here. But what I guess what I'm trying to say is work itself or being productive is a form of addiction for those who don't know exactly what they're doing, who just find themselves getting caught up with being busy with their own company or their own job or their own money-making ambitions. But all they're doing is just keeping themselves distracted and stimulated. And that comes in the form of the phone, basically, right?
It comes in the form of the phone, and you're right. It can come. I mean, workaholics are a real thing, right?
Yeah.
They're definitely a real thing. And I think it also just comes down to, like I mentioned before, just knowing yourself. So I think what's similar about you is similar about me. We're constantly busy.
Yeah.
Right? Like I'm always traveling places. My parents are like, please go sit still. And it's just not my personality type. I appreciate that your therapist said, hey, go be Zen. I don't think I'm the Zen type.
Yeah.
And Zen doesn't bring me happiness in the way that it might bring other people happiness.
Right.
And once you actually just appreciate who you are, like if I told you my day yesterday, and I told a few friends actually my day yesterday because they were like, oh, what are you doing after? Like we hang out. I'm like, oh, I'm doing this and then I'm going to go see that. And they're like, ugh, exhausting. And then, which it probably is to most people. And then, I mean, I have an aunt that's a PhD psychologist that oftentimes tells me, Zina, I think you're running away from things because you're too busy.
Yes.
And then what does that do? I respect her so much. She's incredible. I sit and reflect on that, right?
Fetcher, co-founder of Fetcher?
No, my Aunt Melinda.
Okay,
She went to Columbia. She's a PhD in psychology.
Right.
She actually works with students a lot of times in Silicon Valley. And she was telling me, I think your busyness is just you running away. And I reflected on it because it was really personal. I was like, man, is she right? And I was like, no, like it's actually my happiness. Like my happiness comes from being busy.
Yeah.
Like if my days are not filled, I'm not as happy.
You
like,
thrive in being busy.
I thrive in being busy. And it's just like, it's part of who I am. And it's accepting who I am. And I think everyone thinks I'm a bit manic in many ways because I am all over the place. I don't live anywhere right now. Like I'm between the US, the UK, and the UAE. And people are like, how do you live that way? I'm like, this is how I like living. And I think when you're unconventional in the way that you live, sometimes people want to box you in a way. And it's up to you to decide if you want to fit within that current certain constraint. And look, I go to therapy because I love going to therapy and I learn a lot from it. But the advice that you get sometimes you can use it and it's really helpful. But sometimes you actually have to be like, you know what? This just is not, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Or what you're saying doesn't work for me.
Sure, I hear you. As somebody who is exactly like you, who thrives in being neurotic or busy, whatever you want to call it, and I do, right? I can't, I do some form of mindfulness or breath work because it actually makes me feel good, right? And I don't do I can't do a mindfulness session where I just sit and breathe and let the thoughts like go around like clouds, which is I guess one way to describe how that exercise is. But I do like this intense breath work, which is the total opposite of being still. It's like you're breathing heavily. It's like working out while you're lying down. It's crazy. And that worked for me because it kept me active and it allows me to think about whatever the fuck I want to think about and even like obsess about it if I want to because I'm breathing through it in it. So this I love to do, right?
Yeah.
So what I think ideally is the case is even for people like you and I, at least in the way that you and I are similar, is whether we are able to actually meditate still for even for an hour a day without it being something that gives us so much anxiety.
I agree.
So are you able, because I can't, like I can't, if you tell me do an hour a day of just sitting still and doing nothing and then go get neurotic for the other 24 hours, I still can't do it. Like I'll still kick the can on it. I'll go work out for 2 hours. Don't make me sit for half an hour on my ass.
Yeah.
Fucking imagining just doing nothing other than sitting. That's a lot of still time. I can't do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So for me, I use the Calm app and Calm, you can either choose like a male narrator, female narrator for like 10 minutes a day.
Yeah.
So I do that every morning.
Yeah.
And that brings me stillness because I know the rest of the day is probably going to be a lot of different things kind of happening in it. And that's, in many ways, I brought that upon myself the same way that you probably bring it upon yourself to be busy.
Yeah.
And the whole like sitting for an hour, I mean, I went to some retreat in California and like it was, you wake up at 4 a.m. and you just sit in some place and meditate for like 3 hours at a time. Silently. There's bells every once in a while. And it's
torture.
It was hard.
Yeah.
It was hard.
Did you go through the whole thing or did you like?
I went through the whole thing. It's this place called Tassajara. I recommend it to anyone.
Vipassana style, like Vipassana.
No, you're like, it's like run by monks and you're like up in the mountains. There's no cell phone service. Right. There's a lot of naked people because that's California.
Right.
Honestly, it's a funky place.
Yeah.
But I appreciate people that can do that. And I don't know if you know Ray Dalio, the guy from Bridgewater
Investor,
Capital.
Of course.
So he has a book called Principles. And in the book, he basically says that, and he's, by the way, I think the most successful hedge fund manager of all time.
Yeah.
He says that the reason that he's so successful is meditation.
Yeah.
So I started to get into meditation because I was like, man, this guy must know something.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you read his book, he actually has like some really intricate ways of investing and
admits to his wrongs too and all that.
Yeah, he's incredible.
Yeah.
And it was inspiration actually from him to start, because what I do appreciate about meditation is the stillness that you have there. You do get thoughts. And the beauty of meditation is that, as you probably, like when you go through it, they tell you whatever thoughts come through, let them come, right?
Yeah.
Don't fight them.
Yeah.
Whatever comes, just say, thanks, thought, like, keep going. And when you realize what you're thinking about in a calm state, that's when you like reach some form of enlightenment on your life and your day and what you're worried about.
Yeah.
And then I haven't mastered it by any means, so I'm not really good at it. But that's what I recognized when you're sitting and you recognize the thoughts that just keep coming up and they're recurring day after day after
Intrusive
day.
thoughts.
Intrusive and also sometimes damn annoying.
Yeah.
That you're like, why am I thinking about this? I just need to like not be thinking about this.
It turns out, and again, this is from personal experience, I was being obsessive with some thoughts of my own at some point in my early 30s. And it wasn't the first time that I was obsessive with my thoughts. And I got it, and then I found this guy who's on YouTube. He resonated. He wasn't even trying to sell a service, but I reached out to him anyway. I was like, listen, you seem to have hit the nail on the head with a few things you said. And can we just have a chat? I don't know if you're offering that service. It's like, I'm not even a licensed therapist, but I do have actually people come to me. So let's do the session. Anyway, we have the session, and long story short, what he tells me is all those kind of thoughts that are recurrent that come to you, especially those that you try to resolve. And when I say resolve, I mean you're either trying to figure out a solution in your head, or you're trying to come up with different scenarios, and you're trying to find which one is the most settling, whatever it is all forms of coping. And what it does is every time you figure out that's the answer or the solution to that problem that keeps coming to you, you are releasing a little bit of dopamine, and your body likes dopamine. So your brain is trying to make you happy because dopamine is a happy hormone.
Of course, yeah.
So when you solve that problem that your brain throws at you, and you release dopamine, what your brain does is throw it at you again, because every time it throws it at you, you're going to think of it again, and you're like, oh, maybe I should figure out a better solution or a different solution. And so it's almost like that puzzle that your brain keeps sending you, because your brain's trying to make you happy. It's your friend. As he said, it's your frenemy. It's your friend, but it's also your enemy, because it keeps throwing at you that same problem, because what it's trying to do is purely chemical or neurochemical, which is giving you dopamine, because it's like the Sudoku or Wordle puzzle that you got to solve every time.
Love Wordle.
And before you know it, you're actually solving that's one of the pandemic stories. But before you know it, you're just addicted to that problem now, or thought, because you keep trying to solve it, create more dopamine. And before you know it, your days are going by, and you're just becoming an obsessive, crazy maniac,
But isn't that amazing? Like, isn't it amazing? Because there's so much we don't know about the brain. And there's so much that we don't know about why our brain does things in certain ways and how we can become obsessive with thoughts.
Yeah.
And the beauty of it is when you recognize that you are not your thoughts.
Yeah.
And that they're just thoughts, and whether they're good thoughts or bad thoughts, that's you putting a judgment on them.
Yeah.
As opposed to just letting them go, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, it's oftentimes we're sitting there and we judge ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? We judge ourselves for the thoughts that we have, and then we're like, and then it's when you just realize that you are in control also of those thoughts.
Yeah.
And that you can choose to continuously have those thoughts or create a different script for yourself.
Yeah.
So like one of the examples is self-limiting beliefs.
Right.
So have you come across self-limiting beliefs?
Part of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming.
Yeah, it's basically how do you talk to yourself?
Yeah.
Right? And if you constantly are talking to yourself like, I'm not good enough, I'm not successful enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm, fat, whatever it is.
Yeah.
That's you talking to yourself.
And creating that reality.
And your thoughts, like, I never really understood it until probably a few years back. When they really say your thoughts create your reality, they really do.
Yeah.
And when you sit and you create and you consciously create a different script for the problem that you're looking at, it's insanely powerful.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can't even, I really do want to emphasize how ridiculously transformative that has been in my life.
The language you use.
The language that you use to describe your life.
Right. 100%.
And your problems.
Yeah.
And
so how do you, let me ask you something. How do you check whether you're bullshitting yourself or whether you are setting the right foundation for how you want to live your life?
What a deep question. I like it.
Yeah, because I mean, a lot of times, unless you have an answer, because do you have like an answer off the top of your head, or because we're kind of I'm just off the cuff like asking questions here at this point, because I don't have the answer to that question, but I think about it all the time. Like, how much of it is just me creating a narrative that I want to establish, and I need to do this process, which is create a narrative and follow it, versus I'm bullshitting myself. Is there a way to like?
So when I was I don't even say when I was a kid, maybe when I was high school, one of my favorite words was the word believe. I just loved the word believe. And then what I realized is in the middle of the word believe was lie. And when I realized that, I don't know why it took me so long to realize, I realized that half of believing is lying.
Right.
And when you recognize that believing in something, which is usually oftentimes yourself, you have to sometimes lie to yourself.
100%. Placebo. Fuck it. I'll take it any day.
Yeah. And you have to somewhat, and that's what manifesting is, right?
Sure. Yeah. 100%.
Manifesting is believing something before it's even there.
Even if it's not objectively
If it's not objectively there.
based on the scientific method. Fuck it. Who cares? Does it work? Does it get you good results? That's what matters, right?
Yeah. And
Absolutely.
then in many ways, it's believing in something before it's there. And then therefore, that's you maybe lying to yourself in some way, shape, or form. And I think it's so cool.
It's so cool. I love that you found an actual like kind of coincidental linguistic hack there between in the word believe there's lie. It's so cool. I think you might be the first person who's ever discovered that. And
you know where I saw it, by the way?
clearly it's a coincidence. Oh, sorry, go on. Is it like one of those Facebook memes?
No.
Oh, okay.
So I saw it. It was like Christmas time in New York City.
Yeah.
And believe is a really big word during Christmas time because of Santa, right?
Yeah.
And then I was looking up I think it was Herald Square where the big Macy's is.
Yeah.
And the Macy's sign had a huge believe sign. And for the longest time, believe was my favorite word. I had a bracelet with believe on it. And then only in that one time did I see the word lie in it. And I was like, no.
Was the light flickering for the LIE? Like,
No, it was just like, it was just on the top of the building. And then I got upset. I was like, oh my God, this can't be my favorite word anymore because it's lying.
It's amazing.
Yeah. And now my favorite word is now.
Why?
Well, I only have one tattoo that thankfully my parents know about, so I'm not being rebellious.
All right, cool.
And it's tattooed here, and it says now.
Uh-huh.
Because to me, now represents that there's nothing in life other than right now.
Yeah.
And being present in the moment that we're in. So a lot of times depression, anxiety, all of these things actually come from worrying about the past or worrying about the future. And unless you're getting physically tortured right this very second, most people's now are pretty good.
Yeah.
And the now is just, if your now is not good, it's because you're worrying. It's because you're anxious about something that is not in front of you. And there's this beautiful idea behind like flow and how you're really like present in the moment of things. And I think that's what phones do, right? Like phones take you out of the now. They take you to like Ukraine or Russia or somewhere else to not be there. And then I also think it's just, if you read now backwards, it's one.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And then one is also having a sense of gratitude.
Yeah.
So it's appreciating because I'm constantly thinking that I am not doing enough. And it's about appreciating that in many ways you've already won.
Yeah.
Like sometimes to me, winning is the family that I was born into, the country I was born into, and what I've done already.
Yeah.
Because constantly striving is exhausting.
You're taking me right into I have here a bunch of questions about inequality of women in the workplace and a bunch of other questions, but I want to go right into this because a little bit of context here. We went for an Easter lunch with Soti and Aya and Amin and Anud, and one of the questions that came up was ambition versus greed. So how can you know if you're being ambitious as a person or you're being greedy? And I thought that's a fascinating question. But then it made me think about another question, which is what you were talking about, which is gratitude. How different is gratitude from? So how can you distinguish between gratitude and settling? Ooh. And I thought it's a perfect analogy to the first question, which is how can you distinguish between ambition and greed? These are very deep philosophical questions, but I realized that it's a matter of perspective. Like it's almost like is a cup half full or half empty? You can look at the same situation from the same subject, being yourself, and look at your own life and be like, damn, I fucking killed it. I'm amazing. I'm incredible. I've won, you know, and definitely we should do that, right? Like I think most people probably are hard on themselves, and that's part of why they're miserable or anxious, whatever it is. But too much of that can also make you kind of fall off the wagon, maybe, or cut yourself more slack than you should. There's no objective way to actually figure this question out. It's almost perspective entirely. It's a couple of things. It's your own perspective, how you're feeling that day, your mood, all that stuff. But it's probably also the 5 or 6 people around you who are setting the bar higher than what you can even look at your own life. And they're making your own life look silly in the face of what they're doing. But then if you're around a bunch of people who are like lazy bums and you look great, like then you're going to look at your life like, I'm killing it. So there's really no way. It's just perspective. It's entirely perspective.
It's totally perspective. But that's why they always say that life is the 5 people that you surround yourself by all the time.
That's
like
right.
You're the average of the 5 people that you surround yourself with.
Yeah.
And there is something to be said about the social circles that you keep.
Yeah.
Right? So I think what I find really interesting just on my side is I think if I look at my life, I feel successful. Yeah. Right? Like, alhamdulillah, I think I've worked really hard to get to where I am and I feel successful. But do I not look up to the women that I admire, and it's always women, the women that I admire that have built insanely awesome brands, that have, I don't know, IPO'd companies, and not feel a sense of, why am I not doing more? That gets annoying. Because when you end up like not thinking what you've done is enough, then you actually you don't appreciate the life that you have now. And I think what's interesting about what you said, because I mean, a lot of the people that you just mentioned were people that went to business school.
That's right.
Is, in my opinion, going to business school pushes you because you're constantly surrounded by people that are doing a lot.
High achievers.
And if I look at, God bless them, my high school friends, they're in many ways not as ambitious as the people that I went to business school with.
Yeah.
And when you see your peers excelling, it's no longer about, can you do this? It's just, you can do it.
Yeah.
Because you just see people in your same entire group doing interesting things. And I say, I mean, at Palma, like I grew inspiration from my cousin that built a brand. And it really is just by seeing the role models around you and the social circles that you're kind of keeping.
Yeah. And it's also critical that these examples that you surround yourself with are within the vicinity of what you can achieve. Because imagine if you're thrown into a bunch of high achievers and for whatever reason, good or bad, maybe you didn't have enough fortune to go to a good school or whatever it is, or go into consulting. Then you're surrounded by a bunch of people who are killing it, making money, creating companies, and you're like, I don't even know where to start. Yeah. That's just like stressful. Similarly, if you're somebody with a lot of potential and you're just surrounded by a bunch of people who are just like getting drunk all day and hard, you know, and you can do much more, you're gonna like relax, right? So it's very important to have the awareness to put yourself in the right environment that has first and foremost growth in it, as opposed to the opposite of growth, whatever that word is, deterioration. But also not too much growth to the point where you feel like inferior or you start to develop an inferiority complex, because then you start to get resentful or whatever it might be. That's what kind of why I loved going to New York, because even though I grew up in Jordan, went to Dubai, consulting, all that stuff, and then I go to New York and I know I had potential and I was starting a company and people around me were already like 3-4 steps ahead, but not like 20 steps ahead. I wasn't around Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs, and like I was still surrounded by people who were at a point
attainable.
They were at a point in their own respective paths that I could look at it and be like, I could get there. That's not totally that's not Elon Musk, right? That's somebody who perhaps at the time that's the wrong measure, but still it was one of the measures. That person just raised $20 million. I just raised $1 million. I would like to raise $20 million and be at a point where he or she is, you know, have 20 employees or whatever it might be. And that's attainable. And it's very important. And that's one thing I loved about New York, is that everybody had a cool story. Everybody was starting a company. And something about, like, you know, Dubai is starting to become up and coming nowadays, but New York is just filled with these amazing stories. And it's
filled with it. And it's the environment that you surround yourself by.
Yeah.
Right? So I lived in Dubai, I guess, for 5 years. And then I've been in the States for the last 5 months. And being in the valley is contagious.
Yeah.
Right? The like entrepreneurial bug is contagious. One of my favorite things was probably a month ago. I was at the WeWork in Palo Alto, right next to Stanford. And there was these two dudes. One of them was like, he used to be at Snapchat. Other one used to be at Facebook. And they're sitting and they have a whiteboard and they're just in the common area. And it's nice. Like WeWork, you know, you meet people. And I just see them writing down 40 different business ideas.
Yeah. Wow.
And it was everything from, I don't know, something for TikTok to like a men's personal care brand to everything. These guys were just like, I'm in the valley. I need to create a company.
Yeah.
Like that was just, there was no other option to them.
Yeah.
Like one was an engineer. The other one was a business guy. They were like, that's it. We got to create a company.
Otherwise you're just going to be drugged out on the streets and the Mission or whatever it is in San Francisco. There's a lot of them too, by the way.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of, actually it's a bit of a mindfuck. I don't want to take you off your point, but like how San Francisco can have like the
best and the worst.
The best and the worst.
Yeah.
And the same block too. Like again,
I
think it's called the Mission, right? Like,
Tenderloin.
What was it called? The Market Street, you know, where
Tenderloin.
Right.
The bad area.
And it's a bunch of homeless people drugged out. And I think a lot of them were actually on the path to become entrepreneurs, developers, whatever it is, and somehow found themselves astray and like, you know, taking...
I don't know if I like at least the ones that it would be hard for me to imagine the ones that are on the street that I've seen being that type. But I'm sure that's very possible.
Yeah.
But I think that's the interesting thing about America is that there's no real social safety net.
Mm-hmm.
And what's awful is the homeless situation. And I hadn't lived in America in 7 years. And because I went to business school, then I came here, then I did a bit of traveling, and then I went back. It was such a different America.
But you were born and raised in America.
I was born in Amman, and then my family moved to New York.
Right.
And the America I went back to was dangerous. No one was wearing nice watches. People traded in their nice cars because they didn't want to seem ostentatious. There were muggings everywhere. Like people were genuinely scared. And, you know, shootings and all that fun stuff. But it also was America that was polarized. Like Democrats, Republicans, it was just a very different America.
Which part of America were you in? New York, San Francisco?
So my parents live in New York, and then I was in Silicon Valley where my grandparents are.
So even in Silicon Valley where you went, you sensed the polarization?
Well, the polarization we were just talking about, like on the Tenderloin versus like 3 blocks down is Billionaires Row, Broadway Street and SF.
Right.
It's like literally like 5 blocks away from each other.
Right.
And it's shocking.
Yeah. Okay.
Like it's legitimately shocking.
The pay gap and the sort of socioeconomic kind of segment, let's put it this way. But ideologically, I think California is as liberal as it gets.
I know, and that's the scary part, right? Like when you go to a place like California and you're like, oh man, I wonder what the rest of this like country is like.
Right.
Which is the middle, I think.
Yeah. I mean, the coastal parts of the U.S. are definitely not. They are as left as it gets, and then you have that middle part. But the U.S., I guess the point here is surrounding yourself. It could be. I mean, Dubai is great. Like, there's nothing wrong with this. Especially nowadays, it's starting to get. You know, the story of Mudassir, you working at Careem as a story, the sort of how busy consulting firms are in the region. This is a city that is setting the bar high enough for people to come here and treat Dubai as their own New York, the way New York is for me. As somebody who lived in Dubai for 15 years, I needed to go to New York and be like, that's cool. I want, it inspired me and energized me. But Dubai is that and continues to be. And actually, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, because I know you worked in Saudi for quite some time, especially with the startup scene. To what extent is Saudi catching up to Dubai when it comes to a bunch of things? The startup scene, the social scene. Obviously, women, maybe it's going to take a while, but that's a good start that they have, you know, with a bunch of the laws. But like how much do you know about the scene in Saudi from what you've seen, and how confident are you that Saudi will catch up to Dubai very soon, or the gap is way too big? Saudi is just never going to catch up to Dubai.
I love talking about Saudi. I think all of my friends have started thinking I'm like paid for by Saudi to talk about how awesome I think Saudi has become, which is not true.
Okay, I was going to say, are you?
Just in case I'm not on anyone's payroll.
A cheeky way to say that. People think that, but I didn't say I'm not.
No, obviously not.
Okay.
I feel like maybe there are people, but I'm not one
Maybe
of
there's an
them.
opportunity there, but yeah, fine.
I'm not one of them.
Okay.
But I'll set this context maybe to share why I'm excited about Saudi.
Yeah.
So the first time I went to Saudi, it was November 2015. I was working at BCG and got on one client project. And the client project that I got on, I was working in a media company. And in that media company, they happened to have a women's magazine. And we go to the client on the first day. And I just, first day, getting your bearings, I ask, where's the women's bathroom? It's a 7-story building. They're like, we don't have a women's bathroom.
What?
And I was like, don't you have a women's magazine? And they were like, yeah, dudes write for it. I couldn't.
Which magazine is that?
I can't say.
Okay. Okay.
And that was beyond me. And then also the concept that I'm very anti-buy. The fact that I had to be covered up, my other colleagues could wear whatever they would wear elsewhere. The fact that in a restaurant, I had to be separated from my male colleagues because they were in the single section, I was in the family section. There was no music at restaurants. Yeah. Everything about being Saudi when I was there was awful.
Which year was that?
2015.
Right.
And I hated it. And I think it contributed a big piece to why I hated consulting so much, because I hated the environment that I was working on.
Yeah, can't blame you.
And I remember one of the other projects was something to do with Vision 2030. And I was like, man, this country's not going to change. I don't see it. And I didn't want to contribute my work life towards advancing the country, to be honest, because I just thought much to do what we just talked about, passion.
Yeah.
I'm not passionate about this country.
Yeah.
This country hates me.
It's a waste of my potential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not even it's a waste of my potential. This country does not like me, does not like my gender, right? I have to be covered. I have to not have a bathroom in places. I get yelled at by the mutawa for having my hair out.
It's nothing personal though. It's just the scripture, right? But
no,
I hear
totally.
you. I hear you. Yeah,
but
yeah.
it felt not natural, and I think maybe I had the arrogance, and it's pure arrogance of being from living in California and coming back. So I was like, just get me out.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Get me out. Yeah. And then fast forward to, I would say 2021, and I now actively and happily go back to Saudi.
Wow.
And to me, it's shocking, the transformation that's actually happened. So the transformation just culturally, in terms of the whole, and I mostly go to Riyadh. Riyadh as a city is just transformed. I don't wear abaya. I actually wear jeans and a t-shirt. No problem. No one yells at me, which is, I think that sounds basic in the rest of the world, but it was a big deal.
For those of us who went to Saudi, that's a big deal.
Yeah, it's a very big deal. In December 2021, I went to the raging music festival.
The rave?
The rave. It was the funnest place ever. I had so much fun.
Really?
Yeah.
What was the male to female ratio?
Oh, it was 90-10.
Okay. But
I was there with 500, I was consulting for 500 startups on something.
Right.
And I had a big German guy and a big Swedish guy that I was they weren't my bodyguards, but they were my colleagues.
All right.
So they
That's
were there.
VVVIP ticket for anybody's asking, right?
But they were there, so I didn't have to deal. But there were some unfortunate things that I think happened to some women there. But the fact that the country is allowing music to that scale. Yeah. I went to the F1 with Justin Bieber being there. I cannot believe how much that country is transforming, and for the positive. Of course, there's negatives. Every country has its negatives. But what I will say is, will Saudi catch up? Saudi is catching up. And what I appreciate more than anything is I genuinely think Dubai needs competition. As a city, this city has monopolized Arab talent, and to the point that Arabs that are well educated, unless you're doing family businesses, you don't have real options in the Middle East to really do well and want to live in, importantly, other than Dubai.
Yes. And you're saying Saudi's getting there?
I think Saudi's getting there.
Life in the compounds in Riyadh is not bad at all.
That's what I mean. I think the compound life, if anything, is actually...
It's always been pretty good.
It's always been pretty good. But I think what's catching up is the fact that Saudi kind of went to sleep for like 30 years.
Yeah.
And everything went backwards, and then they woke up and they're like, whoa, look, Dubai created a city out of nothing.
Yeah.
And then I think there was a big sense of jealousy that kind of popped up. And look, competition, whether for countries
or companies,
is a good thing.
Agreed. Yeah.
And I appreciate, and I think what annoys me about, so I'm a big proponent to Saudi, is I have a lot of Arab friends that are constantly talking about certain negative things that happened in Saudi as reasons not to cheer for Saudi. And my perspective is the more we have strong countries in this region, the better it is for the entire region. So we need to stop not rooting for places and start rooting for them.
Yeah, I mean, listen, on the one hand, nobody's innocent. Every great nation, especially the United States of America, has got blood on its hand. It's got blood all over.
It still has blood on its hands every day.
Its hands, everywhere. It's blood on its face,
day.
blood on its toes. It's the worst nation in the world when it comes to like the crimes they had to commit in order to get to where they were. So if this is how we're gonna start to judge,
and they're still committing those crimes.
Absolutely, 100%, right? And it doesn't make them any better or worse. I'm just saying, like, it's compared to what it was yesterday or last year, doing much better in terms of women rights, in terms of empowering people. You know, love him or hate him. MBS is doing a net positive outcome, at least for his people. I mean, again, we can discuss and debate all day geopolitically, Yemen, Syria, like, it gets complex. But as far as the Saudis are concerned, it is a renaissance. The renaissance is alive and well. There is a rebirth in Saudi Arabia. Women are starting to start companies. They're starting to show up on a podcast. The other day, I went on YouTube, and there was a guy called The Mo Show, and he had a bunch of like female Saudi entrepreneurs who they had an American accent. I don't think they even studied outside of Saudi Arabia. I was blown away with the kind of examples that he had on his show.
I don't know if like American accent's the barometer of progress, but
I hear you. No, it's not. But it was also a little bit like refreshing to hear that Saudi lady with a perfect American accent, as opposed to like, you know, speaks English well. But but also the accent is when I say it's like, it's more about her character and her personality and her opinions. And you know, right there you saw this Saudi woman in her abaya on that podcast, which is I think it's a very liberal podcast. At least not, maybe they're not drinking alcohol or whatever, but like it's in English. It's clearly a very progressive version of Saudi Arabia. And I think all of that is a vision, very similar to maybe not exactly the same, but very similar to what we had here in Dubai with Sheikh Zayed, and then with his the leadership that followed afterwards. And I have to say, from my own personal experience, doing business with the Saudis is amazing. It's refreshing. I almost never have a hard time with the Saudis, and it's something my father told me. And my father did business with the Saudis in the 70s and the 80s, early 80s. And he always told me, like, and he kind of hit his jackpot business-wise in a win-win situation with a bunch of Saudis that he kind of found himself becoming friends with and trusting them, and them trusting him. And then he kind of mentioned it to me at his old age, which was like, you know, if you find yourself doing business with the Saudis, they're great. They're not known to be like the assholes who will cheat you out of a business, and perhaps it's because of their abundance. I don't know. We can always wonder why they are so honest, or why they're so, you know. But like, I love doing business with the Saudis, especially as a Jordanian, as an Arab, because I know how to, like, I can do a deal over WhatsApp without a contract, and it's on. I've never been disappointed. And that's one thing you got to give the Saudis, is that they are honorable, and they're generous, absolutely. And this is an Arab trait, generally speaking, hospitable and generous. But they're not like, they're the opposite of scamming you or cheating you out.
They're not ruthless.
They're not ruthless. And I love that about them.
We have some people in the region that are known for their ruthlessness.
Yeah. And that's what makes me wonder whether it's the abundance of what the Saudis have as opposed to other nations that don't have that abundance. So they become a little bit, you know, to each his own. But yeah, I just love what's going on in Saudi. I almost wonder, am I going to at any point be like, I would like to move to Saudi, or is Dubai always going to be the more beautiful place to be in? Like, I'm too used to Dubai, you know. I don't think I'll ever want to move to Saudi, even if I triple my money, you know. So I constantly want to talk to people who, like you, have been there or are seeing the scene. Well, what about startups? Are like, it's not like the next Silicon Valley of the Middle East, is it?
I don't think so. But I also think this whole concept of the next Silicon Valley's there for a reason. And the reason is because Stanford's there,
Yeah.
Berkeley's there, Sand Hill Road is there, which has every venture capital fund, like the most successful venture capital funds.
So just for everybody listening and watching, what are those three things that you mentioned?
So, so the reason that Silicon Valley is just so strong is because it has education. So it has the schooling. So it has Stanford and Berkeley.
Top business school, Ivy
top
League. Yeah.
Just undergraduate schools, right? Like
Right.
computer science. Like Stanford's a top-notch computer science school.
Right.
And entrepreneurship school in general.
Right.
Berkeley, same thing. So that's one. That's like you have the education piece. And importantly, with the education piece, a lot of research comes out of these universities.
Sure.
And then these professors want to monetize the research that they've created. Where do they go? They need to go get some money. So they go to Sand Hill Road. Sand Hill Road has Sequoia, it has NEA, it has Andreessen Horowitz.
Venture capital firms.
All these venture capital firms. Yeah. And what's amazing is that, I don't know if anyone knows this, they're all right next to each other.
Right.
So they're literally in these like TP-like houses in, not houses, office buildings in Menlo Park. And they're right next to each other. So, okay, professor wants to capitalize on an idea, comes back, sure.
Yeah. But you still.
And then the last one is, it's a great place to live.
Yeah.
So Boston might have more universities and excellent universities, but no one wants to live in Boston.
Right.
After university,
right.
That is. So the confluence of those three things.
I don't want to mix this with this. They're different. So when you're done.
Fine, when I'm done.
Yeah.
So the confluence of those three things really leads to the reason that place is that place.
The ecosystem is.
The ecosystem and the way it exists. And I think everyone trying to recreate this and saying the next Silicon Valley, it's going to stay there. But when you were just saying, what's the Middle East version of that? I still think Dubai is it.
Yeah, but let me tell you what I mean. And I think it's one thing we started talking about earlier before you came on, which is the bubble or the overhype over valuations and unicorns and this kind of craze over like the next unicorn. A ton of like startups are popping up in the region, either in Web3 or crypto or just like AI, whatever the fuck it is. And there's clearly a lot of funding. There's no shortage of liquidity. And a lot of startups are starting to raise money in Saudi Arabia from Saudi investors.
With crazy valuations.
In many ways, very similar to Silicon Valley is what I'm trying to say. So they may not have the ecosystem and the gateway to the world the way that Silicon Valley has and continues to have. And it probably will be never replaced. But as far as like the .com bubble, comparing like kind of what we see. So there's a lot of this like hype and attention to, oh, my startup is valued at $100 million. Or yeah, I raised $50 million at $300 million valuation pre-money. And so there's a lot of overvalued companies that have maybe a proof of concept, perhaps a little bit of traction. The best example I can think of, and I don't, Kitopi? I mean, I don't know how much traction they even have, but like, not to judge whether they're good or bad, but I'm saying like, the valuations that we're seeing compared to the traction that is there is a huge gap.
So what's interesting about that, so I mean, one of my good friends is the co-founder of Kitopi.
Yeah, go for it.
From what I understand, Kitopi's actually also become, other than just their cloud kitchens business, they've actually started buying up restaurant brands.
Oh, outright buying them out.
Outright buying them out. So they bought Zarub. They bought Tocado. They bought a few other, like I think NBK, is that the pizza chain here, from what I remember? NBK 800 or something?
Yeah, Naked Pizza, you mean? Yeah.
So they bought up like under 500 calories or whatever that brand was called. And they become basically private equity restaurants.
That's fascinating.
Isn't it?
So it's like taking distressed restaurants that are living on thin margins.
I wouldn't call them distressed, to be honest.
Or surviving on thin margins, let's say. Yeah.
I mean, all restaurants, I think, survive on thin margins. But it's more, I think, look, if a founder wants liquidity in a restaurant business, where are you going to get it? Right? Like if you've just been operating a restaurant for 5 years, 10 years, where are you going to get that liquidity other than someone like Kitopi coming up and buying it and then saying, you know what, I'll operate this for you. I'll take over your whole operations. You've built an amazing brand. Give it to us. We'll like streamline it and I think people are underlooking that piece of Kitopi, but so I still have a lot of faith in kind of in what they're doing. But what I think is interesting, so there's two things I think that in what you shared.
Sure.
The first one is just thinking about the raising capital. So what my observations in Saudi, and I will say they're somewhat valid observations because I was consulting for 500 startups, is there's a lot of money being thrown at Series A.
Yeah.
A lot. And people are getting these like ridiculous valuations with not much of like businesses. And people are willing to give money for people to experiment in Series A. What we found is there's not much money in Series B. So how do these companies graduate?
Right.
And if they're not graduating, they die. And look, in the normal ecosystem of startups, 90% fail within 5 years.
Sure.
Right? So that's just like the norm. And I think we need to start accepting failure in like in a better way. But in many ways, I think by giving companies too much cash too quickly, you don't allow them to be startups. And the whole point of a startup is scarcity. So if you give a company $5 million off the get-go with a like business idea to first-time entrepreneurs that have never done anything before,
harming them.
You're harming them.
Yeah.
And I think that's what annoys me about the valuations that are coming out. I don't look, we're raising money right now. Sometimes I see things get funded. I'm like, how? And sometimes you look at the profiles of the people that are raising money. You're like, you came from government.
Yeah.
Like you've never done a startup before. Your whole team hasn't done a startup before. And you're getting $5 million and you haven't even built an MVP.
And you're going to relax. You have money. You can work. You can kick the can.
You can kick the can. And it's just, that's why I appreciate seed. I appreciate pre-seed.
Right. A couple $100,000.
Couple like under $1 million.
Yeah.
Like I appreciate when you get that cash where you're strapped because you have to make tough decisions. You can't just throw marketing dollars at a problem.
Like the accelerator kind of example, right? Or the model of accelerators. They give you 75K up to 150K. Get to the next point and we're going to flood you with cash. Just get there. Get there with a little, absolutely.
I don't think 100K is enough, to be honest.
Agreed.
Like I think 100K is not much. Even if you, like at some point you might want to pay yourself. But I think somewhere like between 500, this isn't scientific, but somewhere between 500 to like $1 million to actually test an idea.
Right.
Unless you tell me that you need this 5 million for some particular reason, but I still wouldn't believe it.
Sure.
Because you need to be able to build a small MVP and you need to struggle.
So you're seeing a lot of examples of this sort of like generous checks being written out way too early on.
Way too early. And in my opinion, to founders that I don't think should be receiving the funding. Because and I'm fascinated. Like I think, and there's just so much hype built up about entrepreneurship. And I think that's also part of my issue with the region is there's no exits. Like, what's the best case scenario for a lot of these companies? And then they're also moving towards unprofitability. And in the US, you can do that because someone will buy you, right? Like they'll buy you in some way, shape, or form.
Here, you got to become a unicorn to get bought out. Otherwise, you're going to become...
Who's going to buy? Like, who's going to buy you?
There is no exit strategy. Yeah, you're going to have to either become a business that generates cash, as a business should, but still, that's not the startup story. The startup story is always you get acquired by another bigger business or you go public. These are the two exit strategies.
And we're seeing Swivel, by the way. Swivel, like this whole IPO everyone's celebrating,
right,
is a bit of a disaster. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, wow, we just IPO'd a company on the NASDAQ. If you look at these special purpose vehicles.
SPVs.
Yeah, these SPVs. And most of them have all been disasters because you basically bunch up a bunch of different companies and just say, hey, we're going public.
So the traction is not reflective of, are you saying like the fundamentals of this business are overhyped or overvalued based on what they listed out? I don't know much about Swivel other than what I've seen.
So if you look at it, like I think I don't remember the exact numbers, but whatever it was, like most tech stocks have a 30% bump when they go public.
Sure.
That's just in the US, that's the norm.
The FOMO factor.
Yeah, the fact that and you always price it in a place that you expect a 30% bump. Of course, there's like exceptions where that doesn't happen.
Sure.
But you don't expect a 40% reduction.
Right.
And that's what ended up happening with Swivel.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And a lot of people shorted it, right?
Oh, okay.
And of course, it's still super early on in their story. But I think us celebrating
valuations
and also celebrating just things that just look good on paper without genuinely understanding the fundamentals behind them is myopic, and it makes us look dumb. And that's what annoys me, because there's some very strong companies, I think, that actually exist in this ecosystem, in the startup space, that are not celebrated enough. And then we just celebrate these milestones of, you just raised $100 million. That must mean you're killing it. You know what? That actually just means that you were able to raise money. That does not mean that your business fundamentals are right.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you can somehow reach some exit in the future and actually return shareholder like value in the long term. And so many times we're celebrating milestones that are just not worth celebrating, because in the long term, most of these things will not work out.
It's amazing that a business was always meant to be about the cash it returns, like even stocks.
To its investors, shareholder value.
Shareholder value. I came across, because at one point I remember, this was back in consulting, I was doing a due diligence project and I was told to do some benchmarks of shareholder value return for certain stocks. And then as I was doing the benchmark analysis, like, all these companies are giving me negative shareholder returns. And I was like, well, they're good companies though, like they're successful. And then it turns out the stock price was going up, but the cash was being, like, they weren't getting any profits back, but like they were listed as like top performing stocks because they were getting, their stock price was appreciating, even though they were either losing money continuously or, and then, so it turns out this entire idea of owning shares in a stock initially was meant to be about the cash that you're going to get back. And then somehow that got hijacked at the expense of, this company is going to grow to get that cash at some point in the future, but don't worry about it. By then you would have flipped hands anyway with somebody else on that stock. So just buy into a good narrative, buy into a good PR marketing stunt, a good team, a good story. And even that company, if it is pre-revenue, pre-traction, is even better, because the moment they start to generate revenue and profits, then they are held accountable to actually bringing in the cash. But as long as they're behind that point, it's actually kind of like favorable from a growth perspective, from a speculative perspective. It's kind of ridiculous if you think about it. It's
totally ridiculous.
So it is totally against fundamental, what business should be about and so on. However, in a world where the world operates like that, it should not be like that. But when it is like that, how can any money manager or any person that's managing wealth not play the game despite the fact that the rules are fucked up? Like when
you have to play the game.
You have to play the game, right? So what happens is that it reinforces, it creates like a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So once you have a lot of smart money putting their money in what should be about fundamentals, but then it's really just about speculation and growth. And
but
then
isn't all markets and stocks and investment a bunch of speculation?
Well, initially it was meant to be about the cash and dividends that this company generates. Probably back in
in early stages, it's always speculation, right? Because you don't have much to be able to assess.
Yeah, before growth was so easy to model out. I mean, I'm talking early 1900s, like when the car company manufacturers started popping up and so on. It was about how much money is your company generating, like right now. Like, forget about growth, because there was no internet and all that. So it was entirely about dividends, right? So stocks were meant to be documents of ownership that get you dividends. Like bonds get you yield, these companies get you dividend. And then growth became that thing that you can get there in a couple of years because the internet gets you growth. And so a bunch of companies started popping up and be like, listen, we don't have the money yet, but we're going to get it in 5-10 years. So speculation became a thing. But speculation is entirely a function of the internet, because or globalization or whatever you want to call it. But before there was any of that stuff, it was about how much money are you making right now, and then whatever profits you were generating, there's a multiple on that, and that's your company's value, period. I don't care about your growth. That's just, that kind of speculation is not part of my modeling. I'm paying you for what you're getting right now. Then the internet came and globalization came. But here we are, and that's kind of how the world operates. In crypto today, it's alive and well. Clearly crypto is not that big application yet, as far as people using crypto, but the valuations are crazy. And I'm obviously a big, you can see behind me the Bitcoin logo, a big crypto fan. I'm investing on it purely on the fact that it's going to continue to be speculative. Truly. I mean, I can rationalize all day why Bitcoin should exist and why it needs to exist, but that doesn't matter. Does it matter? It doesn't matter. What matters is people are going to buy into it or not. And I'm betting on the fact that people are going to buy into this, into the narrative.
But things are only as valuable as people are willing to give them worth.
100%.
Right? Whether that's like luxury handbags or Bitcoin. Like the inherent value of most everything is what someone's willing to pay for it.
That's right.
And that's what's being pawned off on, right? That you're assuming Bitcoin will not exist if no one believes it has, like right now it doesn't have much inherent value, right?
Right.
The value that it has right now is just people speculating of what it's going to be in the future.
That's entirely actually the premise of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's betting on that future.
Sure. Yeah. 100%. What was the name of your aunt from Fetcher?
Joy.
Joy. Joy is obviously a good example of a badass hustler, leader, lady, woman. And you are obviously one as well. Can't imagine you being somebody, in my opinion, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong. I would be surprised if you come to me as Zina Ajlouny, and I know you on a personal level, on a professional level, if you tell me that you've been struggling on account of your gender, but I might be wrong here. I find like you exemplify to me somebody like you are a great example of a woman who would succeed without anybody stopping her from succeeding because she's a woman. To what extent is that true? Am I disillusioned? Do you see? Do you make it look easy when in reality it's actually much harder?
I appreciate that you think it looks easy. So I think there's the thing with gender that I think is really interesting is women only really started working about 50, 60 years ago. So men had centuries of sort of experience in the workplace that women just didn't have. Women were never really expected to work. It was just, the man is the breadwinner and the woman is the caretaker of the home. So I do appreciate the fact that women are kind of new to this whole world, but there's things that are fundamentals that still exist that make it challenging for women. So one of them is, so right now we're raising funding for our startup. 2% of venture capital funding goes towards women.
Like affirmative action?
No. Affirmative action would actually mean that they'd be supporting.
So you're saying, I thought 2% is dedicated for women.
No. As in like, if there's $100 million that's in VC funding, 2 million of that goes towards women-led companies.
Clear. Okay, I understand what you're saying.
And then you would think to yourself, okay, that probably just means women are not starting companies, right?
Yeah.
Not true. Like they're actually starting companies in almost very similar.
Just as good of a company as.
Just as good, and it's actually shown that women-led companies return more towards their shareholders than towards
their male peer company founded.
Yeah, sorry, I'm screwing this up.
No, you're good. I hear what you're saying. So out of the 100% of VC funding that comes, only 2% makes its way to women-founded companies.
Isn't that
even
insane?
Though they bring better returns, is what you're saying.
Isn't that insane?
That is insane.
Yeah.
So let's break it down.
That's a real statistic, right? And like the things that hold women back are things like women in their 30s not being hired by jobs because of an expectation that the woman, or even 20s or 30s, that they're going to get pregnant and then fall out of the workforce. And like, why do I want to waste my time sort of, mentoring or bringing this person on board? They're only going to leave. I'll hire the dude. He needs a career for the long term. He's not going to drop out of the workforce.
Sure.
So there's all these inherent biases that are sort of built in. And I will say the things that exist that make it more challenging for women is also role models. Like if I look at the Middle East, there's a lot of women that I admire, but there's not that many that have started companies that you can kind of look up to in terms of there's just not that many. And it comes...
The only one is Mother, what's the name of the one with the Rabia Ataya's...
Mom's World.
Mom's World, right. Yeah.
Mom's World. I mean, there are amazing women in the region, but it's a very male-dominated world.
That's right.
And especially in this region where women are actually just starting to get their bearings about this whole work thing.
Yeah.
And I think what I really find interesting about just working in general is I even have like family members that didn't want their wives working because what would that say about the male's ability to provide for the family?
The insecurity and the intimidation.
The insecurity that exists. And then people kind of think working... Like to me, the reason I work is fulfillment. I get a sense of happiness, of achievement in working.
Let me ask. Okay, so let me try. So there is no doubt that there is a problem with inequality, whether it's inequality of systemic or more by outcome or by opportunity. We can debate this all day. But there are exemplary women out there who have found a way to succeed despite that. And I guess that's what I want to hone down on. Despite, right? Well, fine, yeah. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm saying despite it, they managed to make it look easy, or perhaps it was easy for them, or I don't know. But what are those women doing that make them get ahead despite the systemic issues that exist in this? And you're one of them, because I feel like, and correct me again, I'm going to repeat the same question I asked you earlier. Correct me if I'm wrong. Have you, as Zina Ajlouny, with everything you have been lucky and fortunate enough to have landed on, but also maybe worked hard for?
Definitely worked hard for.
I give you a lot of credit for, I'm sure you did, but also I like everything else in life, we're also
of course,
fortunate,
everything's
right?
luck also.
A combination of those
1000%
things, right?
agree.
No, but not to take away from this hard work you've done too, but let's just for the sake of being accurate, a combination of good luck and hard work, you are today somebody that I would find hard to believe that somebody, that you've struggled on account of being a woman. And I'm talking specifically about you, not other women. And then there are other examples like that. Georgia is one of them. Aisha, my sisters. I mean, there's a lot of women out there around me in my vicinity that make this whole thing about women being disadvantaged. They make it look like it's not a problem for them. I'm sure the problem exists. I see it with other women too. Don't get me wrong. But my question is, what is it that makes these particular women take out the "I'm a woman" adjective? Like other day, I saw a lady on LinkedIn. She's a female CEO, and she had this like thumbnail on LinkedIn where she had the whole like "I'm a female CEO," and she had the word "female" like scratched out. And I love that. I'm a CEO. Stop trying to make me stop trying to celebrate the fact that I'm a female CEO. It's almost condescending or patronizing. I kind of like that. I mean, that was empowering in some way. It's like almost like giving credit for a woman who's a CEO. Like, hey, you're a woman and a CEO. Good job. I mean, I get it. We need to change the narrative. But I also feel like we should celebrate women who are showing that you can make it. And what are these women doing, right? Like, or is it just a matter of luck? So that's, I guess, what I wanted to get your opinion on, basically.
So I think every successful woman will tell you that they work twice as hard as men in what they do. And I just have anecdotal examples, right? So we're raising funding right now. I reach out to investors, whether they be female or male. Interestingly enough, the only people that usually get back to like cold emails are women, and they respond very thoughtfully. Mm-hmm. So that to me tells me that they're actually spending a little bit more time on getting back to like working harder, right? Kind of in that. But I think your question kind of relates to, do I see biases?
Yes.
Right?
As specifically you.
Specifically me.
Yeah.
If I'm being very honest, I don't think I've seen them.
Yeah.
But I don't know what people are thinking.
Sure.
Right? So when I'm sitting and pitching an investor, do they think to themselves,
she might get pregnant in a few years.
She might pregnant. Why am I gonna bet on this person? Mm. Right? And I don't know that. Mm. But the numbers tell me that exists.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily see it, but I have an example of a friend of mine that's an investor that told me specifically that he didn't invest in a company because
they were worried she's going to be on a maternity leave.
Exactly.
Wow.
And that company ended up being very successful, by the way, and they regret that decision now. But
did you get pregnant though? No.
I mean,
this is a bit of a cheeky joke here, but my point is like there's this like.
But you don't know the biases, right? Yeah. So in many ways, I've never inherently felt it, but it's called unconscious bias, right? The unconscious bias that kind of exists towards you that pushes you not to be as successful as you are. And people, what ends up happening is, especially on the investment side, people invest in people that look like them, that they can understand.
Yeah.
So that's why a lot of investment dollars goes towards white males, because white males are usually the investors.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's usually just what happens. It's the same thing with minorities, right? But if you're asking me if I've inherently felt it, I would say no.
Yeah.
But there's biases that more importantly affect my life that from a cultural perspective irritate me.
Yeah.
And the ones that exist are the age you have to get married at, when you have kids, how you're supposed to look, how you're supposed to act. And all of these things are, it's extra burdens that men don't have to deal with, because they don't necessarily have biological clocks that they're worried about. they don't necessarily have every single like family member saying "عقبالك" every like 5 minutes. Like the things that are celebrated in women's lives in the region are related to family.
Sure, yeah.
Right? They're always related to getting married, having kids, having another kid.
It's certainly nowhere, like for sure women have it harder in terms of عقبالك وإن شاء الله يوم نفرح فيكي وهيك, you know, like the same phrases. As a Jordanian man, I can tell you that I'm also under that pressure. My dad is constantly around. When am I going to see a boy? When am I going to see a child? When are you going to get married? So, but you're right. I mean, definitely women have it 10 times harder. It almost like makes me look, dwarfs the pressure that I'm under as a guy.
But what I'll also say, I guess, about it is you're also expected to, and this is something I get in contention with my mom over often, is you have to look a certain way all the time.
Like you mean your physique, your weight?
You have to like...
Or how you dress.
How you dress, how your hair is, all of these things. And these things take away from time that you could be doing other things. So like perfect examples, I have raging curly hair. And being more presentable, at least in the work world, is considered like more straight hair. And I have to go get my nails done and like go do all of these things. Dudes don't have to go do these things.
Sure.
And you think, okay, that's a tiny thing, right? But if you're going to the salon and you're spending 2 hours a week there, that compounds over time.
Plus
and by the time you
commute.
go there, exactly,
Right, yeah.
that's another like 3.5 hours. And that's just part of the routine that has to kind of happen to be a presentable person in this society. And it's like silly things that irritate me about this. That's like, I have, I think, 8 weddings this summer. And of these 8 weddings, it's like, what am I going to wear? I have to wear a different type of dress. And then if you think about it just in the way that, therefore, I have to go buy 8 different dresses or 4 different dresses.
It's also
depending.
cost.
It's the cost. And then the cost that actually comes in with like general maintenance for women is just disadvantaged.
It's much more expensive. You're right.
It's so much more expensive to be a woman.
Like, naturally, you're at such a disadvantage.
Totally. And like guys can wear what they wore to work to a wedding.
Yeah.
And then they can actually show up in the same way, and they don't have to go
jersey.
get their freaking hair done or go look like things. And I think inherently it doesn't come natural to me. Like, and I fight it because I'm annoyed at that inherent bias.
Yeah, but it's there. Huh? You can't. There's nothing to do about it. Like, because it's around you. It's confirmed by your peers. Like, other women are also going through the same struggle, so you gotta go through it too. You're not going through it alone. You know, every other girl that you know is also going throrough the same stress. Oh my God, I gotta go do my nails too. I gotta go find a new dress. So then it just creates like this cycle, like this vicious cycle of self-fulfilling.
And I'm running a company, right?
As well.
Like I'm running a company, and like my male peers are also running companies, and they don't have to deal with this stuff.
Yeah.
I know it sounds silly, but
but you're right. I mean, look, systemically, you are at a disadvantage. If nothing else, just the fact that women need to carry a child for 9 months, and then also, perhaps that's the big reason why.
And breastfeeding and
breastfeeding and all that, and the default arrangement is, well, you've carried that child, and even though it doesn't make sense because that's stupid logic, but like somehow the burden is on the woman to also raise and kind of take care of the house. But it is what it is. It's sort of like, let's start with the fact that let's try to imagine we even managed to establish equality post-birth because we're a civilized world, whatever it is. But like even those 9 months themselves, especially if it's like 2 or 3 or 4 kids, that's a lot of time. That is just a pure disadvantage.
And if you think about it in terms of the time, it's usually 20s and 30s, right?
The
prime time that people are doing, like excelling in their careers. So when people say, oh, women have to work twice as hard, it's because of those like gaps that end up happening because of inherent things that women also want in their lives, right? So you have to work twice as hard once you get back from maternity leave or because you have to prove that you're still dedicated, right?
Yeah.
And I think what you mentioned, especially also, maybe not so much in the Middle East because thankfully there's a lot of help. In the US, taking care of the household is a burden that falls upon the woman when even it's equal incomes coming in.
But that's what creates the inequality in the pay gap.
That's totally and it's unpaid work, right? Like women do 20 hours of unpaid work in the household in the US every week.
Yeah, and it's not only is it unpaid work, it's also a setback in their own careers, right? Like it's time that they would have spent in the office, which would have led to promotion, which would have led to them making CEO just as fast as their peer males, right? It's not so much that they didn't get paid for this hours that they were nursing at home. It's that they could have spent it at the office if they wanted to.
If they wanted to.
And they couldn't because they just had no other option. But they're like, they don't also want to hand that. They don't want to outsource that process. So somebody's gonna have to own it if it's gonna be from the core family, and it happens to just fall on the burden of the woman, and that is unfair. But it's also a little bit by design unfair.
Yeah, but also if you even look at it in terms of just men in the workplace, I remember this often. If a woman would leave to go pick up her kids, it was like, oh. But if a guy went to go pick up his kids, it was like, he's such a good dad.
Oh,
like what a good, like, oh wow, he's so involved in his like kid's life.
Yeah.
Whereas the woman, it was just expected, like you have to.
Right.
And then it's an inherent bias that's kind of built in. And I don't say this to kind of like rank on men and women. It's just awareness.
So
right?
I watched this episode on Netflix on a series, you may have come across it. It's called Explained.
I love Explained.
So they have the one episode on gender inequality. And it's a liberal show. I think it might be the 5th time that I reference this show on this podcast. But basically, the show goes on to say that, there are businesses that it's understandable that they don't want to hire, especially small businesses, not like big corporates, where like if the whole company is going to be 2-3 people, and 2 of those 3 people are going to be women who might have to dial out for a couple of years or a year, like that company can't like survive, right? And so the show goes on to conclude like, well, it's understandable for those small businesses that they need to take that into consideration, whereas big companies, maybe they can afford to replace a pregnant woman with another not pregnant woman or another person. So basically, first I'm cutting I'm cutting through the shows I'm summarizing it. Basically, they don't leave a stone unturned, but they sort of arrive at the end at a kind of a conclusion, which is some women want to be mothers. They know that being a mother and a good mother means that they have to trade off becoming a successful businesswoman, and that's fine, because being a good mother and a housewife or a mother is hard as it is if you don't have a job, never mind if you even have a job, right? And so I wonder to what extent this narrative, which is important, because we also want women who want to become successful in the business world to be successful and to not have that challenge. So it's a little bit of a catch-22, because on the one hand, you want to empower women. On the other hand, you don't want to make other women feel inferior because they're not striving to be both.
But I think that's exactly it. Like, it's really the non-judgment of it. And I think from my understanding, there's so much judgment. Yeah. So there's so much judgment that exists where, okay, this woman's a career woman. She clearly doesn't care about her kids. Okay, this woman is, a mom, a caretaker to her family, and she doesn't care about her career.
Incompetent or whatever, yeah.
I don't think incompetent, but it's
she's
really...
She's not. I'm just saying that would be one of the labels that go around. Oh, she's a mother. She can't work. She's just...
No, that's what she wants to do. And exactly. I think it's just, we need to all stop judging.
Agreed.
Like, no one knows what anyone's personal circumstances are in life. And no one knows what decisions anyone else has made in life and for what reasons. Yeah. And I think the culture that we're a part of, this Arab culture, loves gossip and loves just ascribing their thoughts onto other people's lives.
Yeah, it's like projecting.
It's projecting, and it's constantly just like there was something that said anyone that is judging someone else's life and the way they decided to do it is just not busy enough.
Yeah, they have enough capacity
they have enough capacity to sit and kind of idly talk about others, and there's always something that says you'll never be criticized by anyone that's doing more than you. You'll only be criticized by people that are doing less than you.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah, and I love that, because to me that actually says that I mean, Brene Brown is also one of my favorite writers, and she always talks about the fact of we should celebrate anyone doing anything. And
just taking the initiative.
And she has a book that's called Daring Greatly. And in Daring Greatly, there's a Theodore Roosevelt speech that she pulls from that says, we shouldn't celebrate the spectators that make it to go see. We should celebrate the man in the arena, the one whose face is scarred, who's has battles from war. We should celebrate the person that tries.
That went to war.
Because they did it daring greatly. And it's really just about celebrating effort as opposed to celebrating
outcomes,
celebrating valuations, sales, all these things.
Yeah.
Like, we need to just recognize everyone is battling something.
Yeah.
And what I'm fascinated about is the world that we live in is a perfectionist ideal.
Yeah.
We're all sitting like kind of scrolling through Instagram or scrolling through something that's showing these idyllic lives. It's all bullshit.
Yeah.
Like, it's all someone's curated version of something that people are ascribing themselves to. And what I find fascinating about Instagram in general, and the reason it's so destructive, and I've really limited my time on it, and I really just use it to keep in touch with friends, is I don't think our minds are strong enough for Instagram. Because if you look at it, you go to, just think about scrolling through, right? You have one friend that's like insanely successful in their careers, and then you start thinking like, oh, why am I not like this successful in my career? And then the next tile is
that's more like LinkedIn, but I hear you. It could be on Instagram too.
Yeah. And then, or something like,
yeah,
someone posts something about their career. And then the next one is about like someone with a perfect travel life. The next one is a perfect, I don't know, family life.
Right.
And what you don't realize is that the people that you're looking at all spike on certain things in their life.
Yeah.
But no one's spiking on all of them.
Sure.
But we just assume that we should be spiking on all of these things. So the perfect person with like the perfect family life is not the person that necessarily has the perfect career, perfect body, perfect like ma ba'rif esh.
Yeah.
But it's ascribing
and
ourselves
you're not smart
to
enough
that.
to realize that they're different people.
But they're different entirely.
And even if it happens to be that same person who seems to get it all right on across all levels, because there are a few of them who seem at least to show that they do, you don't know what else is happening in the background.
Everyone's struggling with something.
Yeah, you don't know what's happening in the background.
Yeah.
A lot of them are in the business of making it look good across the board because that's the business of it, right? So you're right. And then our minds are not smart enough to realize.
We're not smart enough.
What
and
is
that's why
actually
it's
going on.
awful. And that's why it's destructive.
Yeah. And I hate, like, because LinkedIn is a great place, but LinkedIn has become the worst place on the one hand. Because up until 5 years ago, I was having a recent episode with like a LinkedIn influencer type girl, lovely girl. And we were talking about how LinkedIn has become hijacked too, because for the longest time, like, you had all this social media, contaminated, fake lives, very narrow perspectives. And LinkedIn was that place where you find jobs or find employees. And then LinkedIn became a social media, probably after it got acquired by Microsoft. And it's great because we need a social media or a social network for careers. It has its perks. But then everybody's like glamorizing success and kind of, it's exactly the same as what Instagram is for vacations, twerking, and your vegan meal. LinkedIn has become for your promotions, selling your company, or a partnership that you've cut. And this is constant word that I'm proud and honored to celebrate this, celebrating the fact that I'm doing this and that. And like and even those who are like going on LinkedIn and looking fragile and kind of honest, like, oh, I'm having, it's a loaded.
Humble brags.
It's loaded. It's already loaded. Your This is a post that's meant to show that you're weak and you're fragile, but it's ultimately meant to, it's even those who are trying to be honest. I can't even tell if you're being honest or not. Like, I can't tell. Are you being genuine, or are you just trying to like look fragile in order to get more engagements and like, so it's just a very fake view of the entire world, and we are not smart enough to distinguish between how much of it is real and worthy of our attention and how much of it is just disingenuous.
We're totally not, like, our minds are not made for it.
Yeah.
Like, and social media is destructive in so many more ways than we give it credit for.
That's right.
Like, just what it does to our minds, how it hijacks our time. It hijacks our time, our attention, our mental health. Yeah. And the detrimental effects of social media, I mean, are seriously well studied. But it's like we were just talking about with addictions.
Yes.
You don't know how bad it is.
That's right.
And it's bad.
It's bad.
Like, it's really bad. And once you realize that, like, one of the reason that I took away social media, like like when I wake up, is I don't want to pollute my mind with that in the beginning of the day.
So you put your phone away.
I actually don't sleep with my phone anymore. I have a device.
You have an Apple Watch?
No, I don't have an Apple Watch.
Okay.
I have a Whoop that I wear,
Okay.
and the Whoop vibrates and shakes and wakes me up in the morning.
Not when there's a notification, though.
There's no notification.
It's not linked to your phone.
It has no screen.
Oh, okay.
It has no screen.
Good. Okay, it's not,
Yeah,
so it's not like the Apple phone, which is like
No, it just vibrates and
Okay.
then wakes you up.
Okay, cool.
Because if you wake up and you just start like migrating through that much information, like think about it, our brains were not used to this much information. And we're sitting there and we just get like, okay, if I'm thinking through my like social media feed, I follow CNN, I follow a bunch of friends, I follow some travel stuff, a bunch of stuff, some food. And then you're just going through information in a way that our minds are not made to be able to.
Yeah.
We didn't used to have phones or screens or any of these things. And now like we're addicted to just constant information when we used to like literally be just seeing someone.
Hunters and gatherers.
Hunters and gatherers, and also just present in the moment.
Sure, yeah.
And now the fact that I see my dad like addicted to TikTok right now is terrifying.
Oh my God, wow.
Yeah, he's sitting there just like scrolling through videos and sends me like TikToks all day long. I'm like, wow, we got the elders.
Yeah, and it's actually, if you think about it, because obviously the more mainstream version of hijacking consciousness is social media. And obviously the iPhone and the smartphone is the hardware by which that happens. But I've recently dabbled around with the world of online video gaming. I'm not.
That's a destructive one too.
No, I don't think you understand. I mean, I thought we had it bad with social media, like with
You're on Fortnite. What are you doing?
No, not even. No, not even. I'm saying like purely as. So I'll explain to you how this works, right? So you have your Facebook newsfeed. You're scrolling through it. You get a little bit of like Bitcoin news. You scroll through. You see a puppy falling off the stairs. Oh, that's cute. You scroll through. So a lot of content. Then you come across this like Jordanian, video game streamer who's playing this like 1995 Nintendo game, which is basically ping pong, whatever it is. It's not even a cool game. It's like a stupid ass game with like you gotta get the block into the corners and shit like that. And suddenly I'm like a little like fucking monkey. I'm like, is he gonna get the square in the corner? And I'm like, for the last 20 minutes, I've just been watching this Jordanian guy streaming on Twitch, but also on Facebook, playing a square game that shows
esports, right? Like people are sitting there watching esports.
But that's not even like esports with the graphics. This is like basic Atari game. It's like 2 lines and a square, and he's like, oh my God, I'm gonna get the square in. And I'm like, oh, are you gonna get the square in or not? Let me watch you. So I'm watching this guy like play a stupid, like very rudimentary video game on Facebook, and I'm watching for the last 20 minutes, and then I extrapolated and I was like, Twitch is full of these guys. They're just playing video games themselves, or the people are watching them play video games. And it's not even Fortnite or like NBA Live or all those kind of like cooler graphics games. This is like Atari games. And then I realized it's not really social media. It's not like I want to keep up with the life around me. It's just like distraction. Anything that is stimulating, anything that is like going to distract me from whatever I'm going through today, including like just watching a block go back and forth and some guy on a mic streaming on Twitch talking about it, is enough to like just, save me from 20 minutes of my day.
Will save you from solitude, right?
Save me from solitude or whatever the fuck I have to deal with.
Yeah.
No, I don't have to. I'm just sitting on my toilet watching this guy.
And you feel like, what I think is interesting about that is you probably feel somewhat, I don't want to say productive, but you feel like you're doing something.
Yeah, you're with him. He's going like, oh my God, the square almost went in the corner and stuff. And like you're watching him go through it, and you're like, 20 minutes have gone by, and like, and then it happens like 3 times in the week, and it's like, all right, oh my God, I'm aware that my time is getting lost, but probably some people are spending hours following this guy. And turns out there are people who are following this guy for hours a day. They have a badge. They celebrate, the platform is celebrating those who are spending hours. The whole thing is just really messed up.
Because that's the incentives of those schemes. What I find interesting about that is I think oftentimes we tell ourselves that we can do things one-off that will not affect our lives.
Yeah.
So an example of that is what you just mentioned, which is, let me watch this for 20 minutes. And then
it's only 20 minutes.
It's only 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And the thing is, your habits compound over time.
Yeah.
And when I mentioned Brene Brown, she had the author of Atomic Habits, the book, on a podcast. And he was saying that every choice that you make is a vote of confidence in who you want your future self to be.
Wow. It's profound.
It's so profound.
Yeah.
And then the example that he used was burger and fries. I mean, it's literally probably my biggest weakness, like burger and fries. And he was like, every time you decide to like have a burger and fries, you're always like, oh, khalas, like I'll just have it once in a while.
Right.
But then once in a while, it's like every day you make that decision.
Yeah.
It compounds over time.
Yeah.
And then khalas, you've become the person that just has like a burger and fries for lunch every day instead of having a salad.
You've become conditioned for it.
You've become conditioned, and then therefore that's the person that you are. You're not that healthy person that you keep telling yourself you are.
Sure.
And the problem is the one-offs.
Yeah.
That you keep telling yourself are one-offs, but they're not one-offs at all.
Yeah.
Like they're you constantly making decisions every day that
it's just become a series of one-offs.
Yeah, exactly. And when your life becomes a series of one-offs that you keep just telling yourself that I'm just gonna khalas no bas hal marra.
So there's this saying that says everything in moderation, including moderation, and I like that saying. But like I also fear that saying because like I can get very crafty with like moderation. What's the solution? Is it like complete abstinence from weak points, or is it
habits?
Habits, yeah.
Habits. And I mean the best thing really is making clear, defining choices. Because the worst thing to do is negotiate with yourself.
Sure, because you can get very crafty.
You can get crafty.
Yeah.
So when you tell yourself that I am 98% not going to eat sugar, you're negotiating with yourself for that 2% all the time.
And you're going to round down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, that's from Clayton Christensen, who wrote The Innovator's Dilemma. He said it's easier to do something 100% of the time than it is to do it 98% of the time.
Yeah.
Because khalas, you've made that like defining ideal that you're not crossing the line.
Yeah.
Because the negotiation is the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't leave it for, it should not be left for negotiation. It's just subjective. Like there's no room for even consideration. Never mind negotiation.
No, there's a book that I was reading that also talked about just like habits and how the reason to have habits is so that you don't negotiate with yourself and that so you don't have impulsiveness.
Yeah.
Because the impulsiveness, we always lose.
Yeah. That's like, yeah, fuck it. Tomorrow. I'll deal with it tomorrow.
Exactly. Like you procrastinate and you just like make up stories about how like, khalas, your future self becomes this ideal self that's going to do everything. Like your future self is going to be the one that's going to get healthy and not eat like every donut that they just saw. Yeah. And yet, this current self is not that. But the future one is magical.
Yeah.
And it's not about, and like what I found really powerful is recognizing that you are your future self right now.
Yeah. I have to say, I love the theory of all that. It's just that the implementation part of it all, theoretically is sound, implementation-wise is hard. And I almost, it's one of those things that continues to be as part of my journey is, okay, I get how habits need to be formed in order to make it happen, but how do you create the habits? Like it continues to be like, it's a work in progress.
You should read Atomic Habits. Atomic Habits actually tells you exactly what you need to do.
How to crack it? All right, I'm on it. Well, with that note, Atomic Habits is a book recommendation by Zina Ajlouny. For anybody listening and watching still after 2 hours, oh my God, 2.5 hours. If anybody wants to learn more about Palma or about, I know you're mentoring people on startups. So if anybody wants to reach out to you, you're on LinkedIn, Zina Ajlouny, Zina Ajlouny, Ajlouni. Why? Ajlouny.
Right, everyone does that.
On LinkedIn. And thank you so much. This has been awesome.
Thank you. It's been great. Thank you. This is my first podcast, and I obviously love connecting with you always.
Always.
Thank you for having me.
I hope it's not going to be the last time I have you. I'm sure it won't be. And it's a wrap.